Hello guys, welcome to Soul Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto caught the Blacklight virus and evolved Chakra prototype? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. Patient Zero under the Hokage Rock. Konoha smelled like rain and frying oil on graduation night. Lanterns threw orange halos along the market street, and people were loud in a kind of soft way, talking a boo. Chi knew headbands and the price of cabbage and who'd be stuck on which team. The shadow of the fourth stone jaw cut across Naruto's path as he cut left out of Ichiraku's, full of ramen and the wild, ooey certainty that life had finally tilted in his favor. "You're late," Iruka muttered when he caught up, a smile tucked into the reprimand. "Again, I was early in spirit." Naruto thumbed his new forehead protector like it was a medal. "That counts double." Iruka's look said it counted exactly 0. "Go home. Sleep. Teams are posted in the morning. No more heroics tonight." "Define heroics," Naruto said. Iruka scrubbed a hand over his face and tried not to laugh. "Heroics are anything you do after I tell you not to." Naruto saluted, spun, and loped away under the monuments. He cut through the narrow lane that skirted the cliff base, a shortcut he'd made his own, stone on one side and the sleepy murmur of Konoha on the other. The moon tucked itself into drifting cloud. A breeze slid across his neck like a cold finger. He felt the wrongness before he saw it. A small sound, like a nail threatening to fall out of a board. Instinct pulled him flat. Something hissed where his head had been, kissed the stone with a wet smack, and burst into a slick of black that climbed his sleeve like spilled ink learning to flow upward. Naruto ripped at it. The blackness bit back. It slid into the skin between his thumb and forefinger. A needle that heated cold, and then the cold dropped all the way through him. He couldn't hear for a moment. Couldn't see. His breath jammed in his throat and then tore free. His chakra flared, wild, reflexive, and hit the blackness. Pain is a word too polite for the sensation of being reorganized. The world came back at a tilt. A masked man stood 10 paces away, one knee down, root black cloth. No insignia, not Anbu, not quite civilian. Behind him, above, on the lip of the path, another shadow with a short blowgun up to his mouth. The first one moved like a flag snapping in wind. No wasted motion, a pivot away as Naruto sprang up. Everything in Naruto screamed run. Another thing, older, hungrier, opened its eyes and trimmed the scream to a line. The new line was efficient. The angle of the stone, the give of his own tendons, the distance to a shinbone begging to be broken. He moved wrong. It wasn't chakra. It wasn't strength. It was leverage from a body that no longer obeyed his old map. His foot found a smear of wall. His calf tightened like a winch. He kicked off 3 inches of nothing, hit the shooter, and took the blowgun with his teeth. Song. Ethan inside him laughed, delighted and ruthless, before he bit through the reed and spat it aside. The first masked man hit him in the ribs. The strike was precise, the kind that teaches the body to fold. Naruto didn't fold. Something thickened under his skin, a shiver at the edge of bone, and the blow shuddered like it had met an unkind tree. The root operative stepped back with the blank patience of a man checking a list. Naruto did not want to fight like the new thing wanted him to fight. He wanted to be loud and obvious and invincible by momentum. He wanted to make the other guy feel it. He'd spent a lifetime reading runes that didn't want him in them. He could read this, too. 2 of them, 6 exits, a village full of people down the lane. "Hey," Naruto said, bright and careless on purpose. "You dropped your poison ink invention. It tried to eat me. Not cool." The man didn't reply. Naruto smiled wider. "I can bring it back if you say please." The man flicked his fingers. "Now." And another shape lifted from the rock like a piece of it had always been there and simply remembered how to move. Knife, not kunai, square tip, chakra suppressor tag on the hilt. Naruto didn't breathe for a heartbeat. 1,000 tiny distinct colors and temperatures bloomed across his awareness. The copper of the tag, the barn dust of the man's breath behind the mask, the citrus iron taste of the non-lethal poison packed into the blowgun darts, the linen rasp of gloves, the small tremor in the knife hand that belonged to a scar on an elbow from a fall at age 8. It wasn't sight, Not exactly. It was like the world had split into intent and he could taste it. The new thing loved this. It leaned toward it like a dog to a half-open door. Naruto let it lean, but only enough to see. Then he shoved back at it with his own will. No, he told his bones, his breath, the cold brightness knitting between them. I say how. He moved again. Short, ugly, practical. He kicked the suppressor knife out of the man's grip, palmed it, and slid beneath a reaching arm. He could have broken the elbow. He didn't. He clipped a knee instead. The masked man fell without sound, rolled, regained his feet. The second one came in with a wire. Naruto's right hand forgot how to be a hand and became a gauntlet. It wasn't flashy. His skin thickened and blackened at the knuckles, muscle banded like cord, ulna a. ND radius sheathing themselves under the pressure of chakra forced through a new die. The wire kissed the gauntlet and went to sparks. Naruto's laugh came out surprised and a little exultant. The hungry thing purred. A shriek cut the night, thin and civilian. Down the lane, a string of paper lanterns toppled in sequence like a fuse had run down them. They hit the street and burst in orangey embers. And the cart they were hung to went up too fast. Oil, no, too fast. Tags. Someone had laced festival decorations with explosive seals subtle enough to pass the drunk eye. The crowd's murmur tilted toward panic. Naruto moved to run that way. The masked man flung 3 more tags, not to hit him but to stitch a line between Naruto and the street. The nearest lantern glowed a second brighter. The line would cascade. Naruto knew it as surely as he knew his own name. He hadn't seen him activate the seals. He hadn't seen him lay the line. He just tasted the math of it. 9 beats to the last lantern. 6 to earn it. The masked man reached for something inside his sleeve. The blowgun man behind Naruto stirred. The hungry thing had a solution that would taste like triumph. Take him. Eat him. He is just pattern. Open him and borrow what you need. Naruto had never in his life wanted to be anything other than himself. They had called him monster, fox, nuisance, brat, demon boy, burden, mistake. He had learned to laugh so the labels slid off. Now a label inside him wanted to be true. A way to be strong sat in his mouth like a word ready to be said. He lunged. He didn't tear. He grabbed the moss. Ked man's wrist with his gauntlet hand and pressed his other palm against the base of the operative's neck where the cold met the spine. His chakra rolled out in a low tide and back with silt and secrets. The skin under his hand went cool with more than fear. Threads, so many threads, rushed up his arms. Training drills counted under breath, the taste of copper and ink, the doctrine of root spoken without vowels. The sound of Danzo Shimura's cane, a prayer that began, for the good of the village and ended, whatever the cost. Naruto took only what he needed. He took the pattern of the tag run, a mnemonic melody. A tick, a pause. A second tick. He stole the word that would stall it the way you step on a moving rope. It wasn't perfect. The echoes scratched at the windows of his head, wanting in. The man's fear surged and Naruto gagged on it but didn't let go. Sleep, Naruto whispered, and sent a pulse through his palm that fogged the man's head. The operative went heavy. Naruto eased him due. WN instead of letting him crack his skull on the stone. The blowgun man had vanished. No time to hunt. Naruto sprinted down the lane. Lanterns popped. People shouted, grabbed children, gathering arms full of lives and running. One old man stood frozen with a skewered fish dripping oil onto his sandal. Naruto cut through heat and embers, shoulder to shoulder with a woman he steadied with 2 fingers. The line of seals hissed along paper like serpents. He reached the trunk of it, the lamp with the oldest knot, hissing brightest, and pressed his new palm to its shell. He didn't say a prayer. He said the anti-syllable he had stolen. Not beautiful, not formal, and he pushed his chakra through a lattice he hadn't known to see until now. His chakra wasn't smooth. It had teeth. It caught the syllable and chewed it. The lantern didn't explode. The next one in the line sputtered. He slapped it, rasped out the false note, and shoved the line backward like a broom sweeping fire back into a match. Light dimmed in a rush. The last lantern leached its anger like a scolded cat and hung dull. Smoke drifted upward. The street smelled like a wet hearth. People made that complicated noise crowds make when they choose not to panic anymore. You, someone said, hand to his elbow. Baruka. He looked at Naruto's gauntlet and then not at Naruto's gauntlet. He looked at Naruto's eyes instead, narrow and searching. Are you hurt? Naruto took the breath he hadn't had time to take and the hunger rushed up to meet it, ecstatic. It wanted a reward. It wanted more. He clenched his jaw until his teeth clicked. No, he said, because it was true enough. He opened his hand and the gauntlet unwove, his skin cooled. He swallowed down 3 different laughs, 2 of which were not his. Iruka eased his hand off Naruto's elbow. Like he had decided something and decided against letting Naruto see him decide. Come, he said, we're moving people off the street. Then you're going home. Home, Naruto said, and smiled for the first time since the ink had climbed his skin. The smile didn't fit his face right away. Yeah, they moved people. Naruto lifted a cart single-handed when a wheel stuck in a crack, say. Tee it down easy so the child asleep on a sack of grain didn't wake. Iruka watched him not like a man watches a weapon, but like a teacher looks at a student who has turned in an extra page with dangerous handwriting. When the worst of the smoke thinned and the lanterns dangled dead and harmless, Iruka touched 2 fingers to Naruto's forehead protector the way he had as a joke 100 times, and made it a blessing. Sleep. Naruto went back to his apartment, washed until the water ran clear and then until it was cold. He lay on his futon without sleeping. The ceiling did not always remain the ceiling. Sometimes it was bone, sometimes it was old paper. Sometimes it was a shape pretending not to be a shape, the way your gut knows your door is a person when a person stands behind it. A knock sounded around midnight. He sat up fast enough that the air squealed in his ears. The knock came again, slow, light and amused. More a rap than a knock, knuckles to wood in a hello that had already laughed and been bored by the joke. Yo, Kakashi said when Naruto opened the door. Silver hair, slouched ease, a line of fatigue that had learned to keep secrets. I was walking and remembered you live in this exact building. What a coincidence. Yeah, Naruto said. Me too. Kakashi's eye flicked to the inside of Naruto's wrist, where a faint bruise bled outward in a flower, ink under the skin, if you knew how to see. Big night. Lanterns shouldn't explode. You made sure they didn't. Aha. Naruto's grin was knife bright. He'd learned at 12 how to use humor like armor. If you're here to give me a medal, I prefer ramen coupons. If this is a lecture, I prefer it to be short and with hidden moral. Kakashi leaned against the doorframe and looked at him like a problem that had grown legs and started fetching its own tea. What happened to your hand? Slammed it in a window, Naruto said. Window fought back. Kakashi's eye half-mooned. Windows are fierce, especially the root kind. Silence learned to breathe between them. Naruto didn't know the exact words for what Kakashi had not said, but he knew he was being offered something. The possibility of not explaining the impossible. The option of not becoming an incident report. Did you see anything? Kakashi asked, friendly and careless and not any of those things. Saw lanterns, Naruto said. Heard a fuse. Put it out. He rubbed his thumb along his wrist where the bruise showed through. It was already fading. I didn't see who lit the first one. Kakashi studied him the way you look past someone at the shadow behind them. If you did, you would tell me. If I did, I'd make sure they couldn't do it again. That, Kakashi said, is not always the same thing. His gaze softened. Naruto, you don't have to tell me everything. But if anything about your health changes, you go to the hospital and you tell me. Not because I need to know. Because I need you to keep breathing. Naruto swallowed. The new thing inside him pressed its face to the window of his skin. It wanted to see what was outside, to count the ways to own it. He pushed it back. He made his own voice. He made it steady. Copy, he said. Sensei. Kakashi's mouth twitched under the mask, an almost smile with too much history in it. Teams are posted in 6 hours, he said, as if he hadn't been awake all night many times. Try to be late. It'll make everyone comfortable. When Kakashi left, Naruto did not sleep. He stood at the little sink and ran water again just to hear it. He tried to make the tap turn to metal in his hand because part of him knew he could. The part of him that was still a boy told that part to shut up. The apartment smelled like damp and miso and something else now, a clean mineral scent like a rainstorm inside stone. He breathed it until his ribs quit trying to be a different shape. He didn't know if the new thing had a name. He refused to call it a monster. Monster was a word used by people who wanted not to have to understand. He'd been that word too long to hand it house keys. Whatever it was in him, and it listened when he told it to wait. He told it to wait. The morning after a night like that comes no matter what. The sky went white-pink like a sarashi bandage. At the academy, students clustered in apostrophes of gossip. Shikamaru yawned in a way that apologized to no one. Akira stood by the lists like Grace under pressure in a pink dress. Sasuke glared at the world like he was trying to convince it to rearrange. Naruto arrived only slightly late. People's eyes slid to him in a way. He smiled like light off a blade and pinned his forehead protector tighter. Team 7. Hatake Kakashi. Haruno Sakura. Uchiha Sasuke. Uzumaki Naruto. He looked at those three names and felt something quiet unwind in his chest. He'd wanted something that wasn't the orphan's lot. Alone, loud. He'd never admit it out loud, but there it was, the simple want of belonging like a hot stone in a river. He felt watched. He looked up. Across the yard, the Hyuga girl, Hinata, stood with her team around her and not around her. She had a shy wallflower reputation, the kind of gentleness people mistake for absence. Today she looked like absence had decided to pick locks. Her eyes found him. He didn't look away and neither did she. She saw too much. He saw the moment she noticed the seam under his skin. The bruise on his wrist hadn't faded entirely, not to eyes like hers. Her gaze sharpened. Concern nudged her chin up. Worry didn't make her smaller, it made her clearer. She lifted a hand, small motion. Breathe, it said. He didn't know how he knew that's what it meant. He breathed anyway. 4 slow counts in, 4 held, 4 out. Like the new thing inside him had edges and this was how you kept them from cutting you when you moved. He breathed and the hunger scratched and settled. Hinata's shoulders lowered a fraction. She nodded to herself like a promise. Kakashi arrived late, looking eased to be exactly as late as he'd planned. He took them to the roof and told them not to eat lunch and told them to introduce themselves and let the air and their own words show the shape of them. Naruto said he wanted to be Hokage. Sasuke said he wanted to restore a clan and kill a man. Sakura said she wanted to protect the people she cared about. Kakashi gave them a bell test and more important. TLY gave them a mirror in which to see themselves. The new thing inside Naruto watched from behind his ribs and learned the timing of every breath. They became a team because they pretended not to and then did. Naruto cursed and stopped himself because he wanted to be annoying on purpose, not just by momentum. Sasuke watched him like a math problem that might change its variables mid-solution. Ura listened harder than anyone else and realized she was the one who set the beat because she was the only one listening to all of it. Kakashi smiled with his eye at nothing and everything and made tea. Hem steel bells by making them choose each other. No one mentioned the night before. No one mentioned Naruto's hand. 2 weeks into teamhood, they took a C rank that wasn't. Tazuna showed up with a hangover and a bridge in his mouth. Bodyguards, he said. Cheap. Kakashi eyed the mission scroll and the old man's breath and sighed quietly. We'll take it, he said. We're overqualified for cheap. They left the village under a sky like spilled milk. Naruto carried Tazuna's tool bag without being asked. Sasuke pretended he wasn't grateful that he didn't have to. Sakura kept Tazuna talking. Becca. Use silence build stories in your head that aren't true. Kakashi read the book he always read and also read the treeline and the ditches and the ground because he always read everything. The demon bridge. Others hit them on the road with a chain and confidence. The chain wrapped Kakashi in a scream of links. He let it, because he was teaching a lesson and also because sometimes letting something happen is the best way to measure it. Naruto moved before thought. The chain came for him and his body wrote a different ending. The new thing sent tiny shivers through the bones of his wrist, the skin over. The back of his hand slicked glossy black. He grabbed the chain and pulled. The demon brother attached to it tried to let go and couldn't in time. Naruto jerked him forward, twisted, and used the momentum to put him in the dirt without breaking anything essential. The second brother lunged, claws out. Naruto stepped in, too close for the claws, and headbutted him, because headbutts don't fail to work. Sakura had Tazuna behind her. Kunai out, stance tight and smart. Sasuke cut the chain with a precise little flare of fire that burned hot and clean. Kakashi appeared behind them all gray and unruffled, like he'd aimed to be exactly where he was for drama. Naruto's hand unwove back into a hand. He breathed once and didn't like how good it felt. "You're reckless," Kakashi said to Naruto without heat. He tapped a demon brother's wrist with a toe. "These were missing nin. Not smart ones, but still sharp enough to cut you." "They didn't," Naruto said, too quickly. "Yet," Kakashi said. His gaze flicked to Naruto's knuckles and then away. "Good restraint." Sasuke made a contemptuous sound. "He tripped and a guy fell." "Shut up," Naruto said, but he grinned. It came easy sometimes, like walking downhill. They reached the river. The tide pushed against the pilings of a bridge that wasn't finished. Inari, Tazuna's grandson, looked Naruto up and down and found him lacking by the impossible standard that only a child with a wounded mother and a coward for a father can hold. Naruto let the judgment slide off because it was fair in its own way. Inari didn't want a hero. He wanted the past not to have happened. Naruto couldn't eat the past. He could only stand in the present and offer to hold it up. They trained in the yard that night. Naruto ran drills until his bones hummed. The new Hing inside him loved repetition because repetition made patterns and patterns were doors. Every door wanted opening. He counted his breaths. He tightened his forehead protector. He lifted his hands. He told the hunger to heal. Did they always do that? Naruto looked up. Sakura had come out into the yard, hair loose, eyes tired. She gestured vaguely at his ribs. "Breathe like you're lifting something heavy." "Yeah," Naruto said. "Otherwise I get loud on the inside." Sakura snorted. "You mean louder." He made a face. She smiled. It was easy, and that ease felt like a promise that didn't need to be written down. In the morning, the mist curled low and greedy across the river. Zabuza Momochi came out of that white like a poem about knives. Kakashi's eye went red. Sasuke's posture shifted to predation. Sakura pulled Tazuna behind a fallen beam. Naruto did not flash his grin. He let the new sense spread out of him like ink in water. It met other intent and felt the edges of it. Zabuza's focus like a whetted blade. The secondary fleck of someone else hidden behind a wall of ice. No, a wall of moving cold. He tasted blood without bleeding. He tasted discipline without respect. "Stay close to me," Kakashi said. Which meant I'm going to do something stupid but correct. Zabuza's sword made the air ring. Kakashi matched him for a while in the center of the bridge where the world had decided to be dramatic. Naruto's job was Tazuna. He did his job. He did it while his skin hummed with the desire to unspool into 10 different shapes and make the whole battle a different story. Sasuke threw shuriken. They skittered off water like insects misplaced. Sakura read the fight, stayed a step ahead of danger, saw the feint that wasn't, and yelled, "Down." A half second before Naruto would have said it. He looked at her and then at the place where Haku wasn't yet and understood where Haku would be. Hunter sense, he thought, and then thought, that's a stupid name, and at the same time loved I. Because he had named something and that made it a little less like it had named him. The mask came a heartbeat later. Haku moved like a bell note over glass. Ice bloomed. Mirrors made a cage for Sasuke and Naruto both. Haku's voice inside the cage sounded like someone who had been told to be kind and found it didn't always fit. "Please," the voice said, "don't resist." "Pass," Naruto said. He set his feet. He'd never been good with stillness. Now stillness felt like a trick someone else had fallen for and he refused to. The mirrors threw Senbon bright as rain. Naruto moved. The new thing inside him wanted to grow spines. He didn't let it. He let the skin of his forearms thicken and that was all. Senbon struck and slid. Pain bit him in the space under pain where the body writes warnings the mind ignores. He didn't ignore them. He pushed breath through them. He felt Sasuke's heat rise, a temper that wanted to be a torch. "Stop showing off," Naruto said, and took a line of Senbon that would have threaded Sasuke's shoulder. "Idiot," Sasuke snapped, and drove forward hard enough that his foot cracked the slick surface of the bridge. Haku blurred. Sasuke made the same mistake Naruto always made, thinking pressure is precision. It isn't always. Naruto shut his eyes. It sounded like madness. It felt like honesty. If he couldn't see, he could hear the taste of intent. He could taste the sound. Threads of aim and desire and technique and mercy. Yes, mercy, warped and misused but present, ran between the mirrors. He reached for them the way he'd reached for the lantern line in the explosion of the night before. He grabbed one, and another, and tied them as if they were ropes and he were a boy climbing a tree. He put his breath behind it. He pulled. Chakra gathered in his palm. He hadn't meant to do that. He'd meant to move. But the new thing loved patterns, and this pattern, the spiral, the pressure and release, the grinding speed inside a small boundary, made all his bones say yes. He had never been taught the Rasengan. The world had taught it to itself through him. It wasn't clean. It wasn't right. It was a sphere of moving edges, all wrong angles and too many teeth. He shoved it into the mirror at arm's length. The ice listened to the wrongness and broke along those lines because it had never been asked to do that before. The mirror shattered into wet glitter. Cold hit Naruto like a friend with bad timing. He went to one knee and a dozen Senbon made a harvestman's crown around him. Haku stood a little distance away, head tilted. The mask did its job, hiding expression, but the voice slipped. "What are you, hungry?" Naruto said, and then smiled because the word meant too much. Haku moved to kill him. Naruto was faster by a hair, but speed wasn't the point. Choice was. He reached out and caught Haku's wrist the same way he had caught the root operatives. Memories bit him. Fields. A mother's hand. Training with kindness. A man with bandages where a future should be. Naruto could take it all. It would pour into him and give him edges, killing edges, kinder edges. He could understand everything and be done. No, he said softly, to himself and to the new thing. No, he didn't consume. He held. He let Haku feel his heartbeat. He pushed chakra into the point under the wrist where tendons speak to the brain and told them sleep. Haku's body listened without surrender. It slowed, like a river choosing a different path. The mask tilted. For a second Haku's eyes, dark, intelligent, unwilling to be cruel, met Naruto's through black shell. Recognition moved there. Not agreement. Not trust. Recognition. You, their look said. You chose. On the open half of the bridge, Kakashi and Zabuza crashed against each other like storms with grudges. The mist thinned. The tide changed. Mercenaries lined up behind Gato like a garden of weeds that had learned to walk. Go, Haku said quietly. Zabuza needs a hand. Mine will do what it can. Naruto's laugh was joy and iron. Hilarious. He turned. The hunger wanted him to break the mercenaries like matchsticks. He wanted that too, frankly, but for a different reason. They were scared and brave and paid poorly. And wrong, and some of them were going to go home if he did this right. He ran. The new thing unfolded other options. His back sprouted an architecture of lines, a lattice grown of chakra and whatever. The Blacklight wanted to be when it grew up. He felt the wind catch it. It wasn't wings. It was understanding. He jumped high enough for the river to blink at him and not be entirely sure where he'd gone. He glided. He landed behind the back rank of mercenaries and stuck the landing without showing off. He didn't roar. He tapped a shoulder. When the man turned, Naruto grabbed his spear, folded shaft into a useless angle with his knee, and smiled. Go, Naruto said. Please. The word mattered. It made him someone you could disobey without being wrong. People are more likely to obey that kind of person because it feels like a choice. A quarter of them fled, which is a good rate when your boss pays late. The rest came anyway because pride is a kind of chain. Naruto fought small and mean and careful, stripping weapons. Snapping only what heals clean. He grew a shield over the left side of his chest when a flung kunai came for his lung. He used the shield like a gesture more than a two. I won't let you be the person you chose to be today. I will let you be the person you can be tomorrow, sore and embarrassed and alive. Gato had picked the wrong story to star in. Zabuza realized it late and beautifully. He took the boy Haku had been and the man Gato was and broke the one to sever the other. Naruto watched the choice land. Blood steamed on mist. Naruto wanted to look away and didn't. Because looking away would make him the kind of hero who only likes the clean parts. After, the bridge crews wept the complicated tears that have to do with money and dignity and not having to listen to a small man with a big voice anymore. Inari stood on the bridge with fists that didn't shake and a mouth that was no longer as full of judgment. You still look like an idiot, Inari told Naruto. Because love is a kind of insult that stops being insult when it lands. Yeah, Naruto said, but a hero idiot. Inari made a face that might someday grow into a smile if it got good sun and decent rain. They stayed in wave long enough to see the shape of the bridge become a fact instead of a promise. Chizuna named it. He tried to name it after himself and then looked at Naruto and looked at the village and laughed and named it after the boy who'd changed the story and the boy's village instead. Naruto pretended to be embarrassed long after he had stopped pretending. On the way home, Kaka. She walked not reading with his book open and his eyes soft, which is how you know he's thinking about something that isn't in the book. Sasuke was, temporarily, not angry at Naruto. Sakura was listing supplies they needed replaced and staring at Naruto's hand, then not staring, which is how you know a friend won't bite unless you need to be bitten. Don't ask, Naruto said without heat. Not asking, Sakura said. Good. Do ask me if something hurts. Okay. Mean it. Okay. Konoha's gates took them in like a breath. The village smelled like leaf and wood smoke and frying batter and ink. Yo, you don't notice how homesick you were until someone lets you be not homesick anymore. They reported to the Hokage. The fifth, no, the third again, old and sharp and kind enough to be dangerous. Naruto didn't look at the old man's pipe while the old man balanced it on knuckles and thought about what to say. The story they told left out parts on purpose. The truth is big and rooms are small. When the door closed behind them, a bead of black lacquer fell from the ceiling and hit the floor with a soft tick. It sprouted thin legs as if it had always had them, looked around with no eyes, and tried to scuttle for the baseboard. Naruto put his heel on it. Something in the lacquer attempted a prayer. It was a syllable shaped to shut down what it could not contain. It smelled like incense and bureaucracy. He felt it try to find the part of him that hummed wrong. He felt it try to label him, anomaly. He didn't let it. He pressed harder until the lacquer and its little prayer were both a smear no shrine would claim. Kakashi looked down at the smear. Auditors, he said like the word had aches in it. From a temple, Sakura asked. From all of them, Kakashi said dryly. From the people who get together and invent a word big enough to make them feel less small. He glanced at Naruto. It wasn't a question. It was a check. You choose you, right? Naruto shrugged and made it light. Bug season. Sasuke snorted. They broke up outside the tower. People moved in a dozen directions, doing 100 small things that add up to a village being a village. Naruto should have gone home. He didn't. He climbed. The Hokage rock watched over Konoha the way a parent watches a child play with knives, proud and attempting not to flinch. Naruto walked beneath the stone faces and felt their eyes on his back, the fourth's smile. The third's gravity, the first's wildness, the second's chill. He found the place where the cliff would block the last light of the day and sat with his back to the stone. He breathed. The hunger rolled up like surf. Hissed. Pulled back. He let it. He didn't think names. He thought I am not a summary. He thought I am not a list someone else makes. He thought of lanterns that didn't explode because he told them not to, and a boy who cried because he was tired of being small, and a man whose heart had decided to be better too late and had done it anyway, and a girl whose eyes saw too much and chose to see him anyway. Footsteps scuffed to his right, then hesitated. He didn't move. He let the somebody decide on their own whether to keep coming. Hinata. Quiet because she was quiet and not because she thought quiet would excuse her. Hi. He looked over. The light caught a loose strand of her hair and made it a line of white. Hi. I was walking, she said. And remembered I live in this exact building. Naruto offered, unable to help himself. Her mouth did the quick, surprised thing it did when someone made a joke she liked. This building is a cliff. Yeah, Naruto said. But I'm adaptable. She came to sit. Not too close. Not far. They watched the village turn on its lamps one by one, a methodical constellation of curry shops and laundries and people who would not be heroes but who would keep a world running while heroes destroyed it to rebuild. I saw you, Hinata said after a while. At the academy. Breathing. Everyone breathes, Naruto said. You were counting, she said. That helps. He looked at his hands. They were only hands. They would always be only hands so long as he chose that every day. Yeah, she didn't push. If you want, she said, I can show you a form. Father taught me to steady my sight when it sees too much. When, Naruto said, not if. Hinata's mouth tipped. It is consistent. Like me. He closed his eyes, opened them, aimed a grin at her that didn't quite make it to his cheeks. Show me. She did. She put her palms together and split them, a small lift and press, and the breath matched the movement and the movement set a rhythm and the rhythm made a place inside a place for noise to go. He followed. The hunger tried to make rhythm into a trap. He told it the trap had a window and that window was high. And if it tried to climb through it without asking he would slam it on its fingers. You're good at this, she said, surprised in the way gentle people are surprised when the world doesn't fall over after all. Don't tell anyone, he said. It'll ruin my brand. She laughed, soft and complete. The sound made a better promise than most oaths. He felt the new thing settle like a dog that had been told to lie down and, this once, decided to listen. He heard the village breathe. He measured himself against it and came up even. A whisper moved at the edge of hearing. Not words. Bells. No, not bells. A voice that likes lists trying to make itself a bell. He looked down the slope. In the soot along the alley under the tower, a smear caught the last light, lacquer crushed to paste, and in the paw. A symbol like an eye that had blinked once too late. He would have missed it on any other day. He wasn't going to be what that symbol wanted him to be. He stood. Hinata stood too, unasked, and that was an answer. I'm going to get stronger, Naruto said, not to her, not to the cliff, not to the gods or the objects that pretend not to be gods. But I'm not going to get simple. He said it like he would say believe it back when he was smaller. He didn't have to shout it anymore. The stone listened. The wind didn't argue. That was enough. Far below, the market started up with the first songs of evening, vendors calling. Children laughing, shinobi trying to look like regular men and women and not doing as well as they thought. On the roof ridge of a tailor's shop, a small black bead dried out of the air like a tear on a cheek. It sat there, lacquer and quiet. It had come to listen and to name. It saw what it had come to see. It clicked its slick little legs, a whisper of obedience, and started to creep toward the next place it had been told to go. Naruto looked at it from half a village away and felt the pattern in its tiny orders and understood the handwriting of the person who had written them. He smiled without humor. Bug season, he said again. Hinata didn't ask. She bit her lower lip, then let it go and stood a fraction taller. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he echoed. Don't be late. He looked at her pointedly. That's my thing. Choose a better thing, she said, not unkind. He put his hands together and split them, the way she had shown him. He breathed it back, ed the hunger off and made room for other things, smaller things that mattered more. He could carry both. He would have too. They walked down from the rock together without making a map of their steps. And the village swallowed them the way it always swallows everyone, gentle, busy, unforgiving, home. Naruto slept that night with the window cracked and the sound of leaves in his ear. The hunger dreamed of names and numbers. He dreamed of bridges and breath. He woke to a world that would keep trying to weigh him and measure him and write him under a heading. He would keep refusing to fit. He would make himself exactly the size of his choices. And if someone, came to count him like a tax, he would show them how to lose count. Chapter 2. Knives in the exam hall. The academy air smelled like chalk and nerves. The banner over the exam hall door had been hung crooked, and someone had tried to fix it by hammering in another nail at a hopeful angle. It held because Konoha is made of almost right things that keep holding anyway. Genin lined the corridor the way rain beads on twine. Kiba bounced on heels that had never learned to sit. Shino existed softly the way a forest does, by being there whether you notice or not. Ino's ponytail was a promise that no one would get away with anything. Neji didn't look at anyone and looked at everyone. Lee leapt to shake Naruto's hand as if the handshake might solve a problem for both of them. Chunin exam, Lee proclaimed, blinding smile aimed like a weapon and landing like a hug. A test of youth. Perfect, Naruto said, deadpan. I've got too much of that. A flutter of Suna sand coats ghosted the hallway. Kankuro walked like a man enjoying his own posture. Tamari walked like a decision that had stopped asking permission. Gaara walked. D like the sand had a pulse that wasn't his but had decided to share. Naruto's new sense tasted them without being polite. Glue and lacquer and the sour patience of cloth-wrapped fingers, steel wind and the honest bite of grit. Desert thirst, old and precise, with a rhythm that belonged to something that learned to sleep with one eye open 1,000 nights in a row. Temari's gaze flicked to him and then returned for a second pass. He didn't look away. She clicked her tongue, not displeased. Hey, Kiba said, elbowing Naruto. Bet you fail the written. You always look like paper offends you. Paper does offend me, Naruto said. It's smug, all flat and white like it never had a thought in its life. But I will make an exception. Hinata stood with her team a little down the hall, hands folded, eyes steady. She caught Naruto watching her and raised 2 fingers. Breathe. He did. It slid into his bones without noise, an instruction he'd practiced on the monument until it became the kind of habit you don't brag about because it just lives there. The stairwell to the 2nd floor had a genjutsu on it pretending to be the 3rd. The trick was old but still good. Naruto tasted the lie. The way the banisters wear didn't match the scuff on the landing, the way the chalkboard's ghost writing repeated a pattern too neat to be human. He didn't dispel it with a flourish. He bumped the wall with his shoulder and knocked the genjutsu crooked like a painting. You can just do that. Kiba sputtered. You can just not fall for it, Naruto said lightly. The exam room was a grid of desks and lighting and the bureaucratic patience of a man who had chosen to become scary without raising his voice. Ibiki made silence like someone laying a blanket over a room. The rules hit the desks as papers, too many, of course. But the quality of too many that hides the only ones that matter. Naruto sat. His pencil rolled to the edge of his desk and stopped exactly at the point where it would have spun off. Like he'd put a thread on it and tied the thread to his heart. Hunter sense unfolded not as a power but as a decision to notice. Breaths catching, knuckles whitening, the small sound of shikum. Uru's sigh as he resigned himself to being clever in public. The first question read like a joke that hadn't decided if it wanted to be funny. Naruto looked at his paper and then slowly up at the room. He wasn't good at sitting still for logic tests, not because he couldn't, but because stillness tasted like he was letting other people tell his story for him. But this wasn't a logic test. It was an intent test wearing paper. He didn't cheat. He made cheating unnecessary. He tapped his index finger on his knee in a rhythm that didn't belong to any song he knew. It meant nothing, except to anyone who wanted it to mean calm. He lifted his pencil and put it down exactly the way you put a small sleeping child into a bed, which is to say slowly, which is to say a signal that everything will be fine. The room was a network of nerves. If you pluck one string you can make the whole thing hum. Hinata stared at her paper with a quiet concentration that would gut a man if he stood in its way. In the drop of her shoulder, Naruto left a rhythm for someone else to notice. Breathe. In the scratch of his pencil, a second rhythm. Look left now. Not cheating. Coordinating hope. He knew half the answers, guessed a quarter, and invented the rest with such confidence that reality might decide to back him out of embarrassment. He knew he could not know how Sakura's hand answered with crisp little stabs of graphite. But the way her breath eased said she had it. He knew he could not know how Shikamaru's mouth lilted into a small frown. Too easy. This is boring. They're making this boring on purpose. Unless he looked, and he didn't look. He just tasted the edges, left the air calm, and let other people be who they were at their best. Ibiki's final question wasn't a question. Naruto's hand lifted too. Surrender just to see what not surrendering felt like. He didn't put it down. He didn't stand. He grinned at the ceiling instead. When Ibiki passed them, he smelled like old leather and work. He didn't smell disappointed. After, the hallway exhaled 100 small victories and 36 small griefs. Sasuke leaned against a pillar like he'd been born to lean against pillars. Sakura rolled her shoulders and rebalanced her bag's weight across both, because competency looks like that from the outside and feels like 1,000 small choices that look boring if you don't know what they cost. Naruto ducked out into the courtyard where the sun had decided to be generous. A girl with buns like bell knots slung a duffel over her shoulder and flipped a seal scroll between her fingers like it owed her money. Tenten's gaze snagged on Naruto's wrist where it still wore a faint darker weave, a pattern not convincingly skin. "You've got a glove without a glove," she said, voice warm and practical. "I bet it fails pretty at the wrong time." "Wow," Naruto said. "Hello to you, too." She tilted her head. "Not sorry. I like things that work. I like things that don't work if they can be made to." "Wanna show me?" Sakura arched a brow over Naruto's shoulder with the exact expression of a person handing you your own common sense. Naruto grinned anyway. "Yes," he said, like a person with sense. Why cut to an empty practice lot behind the academy where grass had learned to grow around discarded kunai. Tenten spread a canvas and unrolled a small kingdom. Metal, ceramic, seals already half-inked on paper and wood. A little hand vise that looked like a toy and was not. "Hit me," she said. "Excuse me, open palm," she clarified, then smirked, because humor is a tool too. Naruto grumbled something about reasonable introductions and lifted his hand. He called the gauntlet without letting it be a spectacle. Skin darkened. Tendons girded. A lattice of chakra underoat it like nails under thin plaster. Tenten's eyes sharpened the way another person's might widen. She tapped her knuckles to his. The laugh that escaped her was quiet and delighted. "You grew that, kinda. You're going to and a counter seal that doesn't fight you," she said, already fishing in a tin for a small coil of copper wire. Vacuity tags don't care about jutsu. They care about what you are while you're doing them. If I etch the right pattern here, she sketched a circle in the air, you can print it under your skin and make their math bleed at the edges. "You're speaking my love language," Naruto said. "Which is, weird solutions. Hold still and don't superpower me by accident." She wound the wire into a narrow ring and scribed tiny symbols along it with a needle that had a notch cut to catch ink. Yuto felt the pattern like a faint itch down his bones. It wasn't chakra, it was intention with punctuation. "You sure about this?" Sakura asked under her breath, watching Tenten thread a thin leather cord through the copper ring. "No," Naruto said honestly, "but I have a good feeling about her." "I have a good feeling about me too," Tenten said, not looking up. She slid the ring into his palm. "This is a prototype. It wants to sit on bone, not jewelry. Your call." He pressed the ring to his skin. The gauntlet took it because he told it to, because his body listened to him when he spoke without words. Copper sank into palm without pain, just an ache like a tooth remembering cold. The symbol lines lined up with tendons like they'd been with him since birth. "Gross," Kiba said from the fence, equal parts impressed and offended. "But cool gross." Tenten grinned. "You owe me 3 kunai and a training dummy when that works." "Works." Naruto flexed his hand. The ring pattern pulsed once, like a living thing settling into a den. "It works. Don't get cocky," Tenten said. "Get me data." Tamari of the Sand, a voice cut in dry as a Sahara, would like the training lot back for people who haven't turned their hands into hardware. Tamari stood at the gate with a fan across her shoulder like a roof beam. Wind licked out of it in tiny eager tongues. Naruto met her gaze and made the beginner mistake of noticing her smile. It wasn't a mistake he regretted. "Careful," she added with a tilt of the chin toward his palm. "If you screw up, you'll blow your arm off and ruin my afternoon." "I like that you assume I'll still be here to ruin it," Naruto said. "I like that you assume you'll be worth the trouble," Tamari returned, but it landed more like a compliment than an insult. They swapped slots with a mock bow. Tenten tapped her duffel. "Find me after you've given someone a headache with that ring. I want to write a manual." "Manual," Naruto echoed, savoring the word. "I'll try not to bleed on it." "Blood as data," Tenten said, and winked. The forest of death never tried to be subtle. It wasn't trying to kill you, it was giving you opportunities to kill yourself more interestingly. Enko strode through the gates like a party host, which she was, to a very particular kind of party. "Consent forms," she chirped. "Jokes, threats, and warnings. Take one of each." The breeze inside tasted like rot and fresh leaves and the carbon tang of old fires. Naruto liked it, a place that told the truth about what it was felt like a kind of respect. Teams scattered under the canopy. Elite got chopped into pieces by leaves and the way panic makes your pupils try to swallow more than they can. Hunter sense made the forest readable. String sounds of spiderwebs, the glassy scatter of shuriken lodged in bark for years. A low bass growl of a boar that knew this was its territory even if paper on a gate said otherwise. He led Team 7 not by walking in front but by naming the small things, a vine that wasn't a vine. A sign that had been bribed by a genjutsu and accepted. The first time the vacuity tag hit him, it was a kiss that took the air out of his mouth. He'd lunged to int. RCEPT, a kunai aimed at Sakura's thigh and the paper clung to his wrist, a bland charm drawn with a prayer's tidy black. The world hiccuped where his chakra touched the ink. His gauntlet thinned to naught. Hing like it had remembered it was supposed to be skin and skin only, and even that felt like too much. Down. Sasuke snapped. Naruto dropped. The follow-up binding hissed over him like a snake that has rehearsed. A root mask flashed behind a tree trunk and vanished. Hunter Sense tasted a doctrine that smelled like boredom weaponized. Complete the capture, excise the anomaly, justify it later. Not today, Naruto breathed, and took his own arm off. It wasn't as dramatic as it should have been. He stepped to the side and left the skin of his forearm behind on the prayer tag like an animal leaves hair on a fence. The tag crumpled the dead layer, content now that it had something to negate. The bones under that skin weren't bones for long. They grew back with a shiver like dandelions deciding to be ribs. Veins stitched themselves like quick embroidery. Fingers butted. Gross, Kiba said from somewhere nearby and then, after a beat, admiring, no, like, athletic gross. Sakura didn't flinch. Her eyes went flint and then clear. Left, she said, and put a kunai into the left, not to kill but to make a body choose not to be there. Sasuke flung a phoenix flower down a corridor of trees not because there were bodies there but because the fire would make bodies show themselves if they existed. Two masks did. He and Sakura pinched them between angle and heat. Naruto cut through the gap, and planted his new hand on a face that wasn't brave enough to be a face and whispered, sleep. It worked even when you weren't ready for it to work. He hated that. He used it anyway. Ino's voice crackled in his head, not literally. Not by jutsu he'd agreed to, but by proximity. Team 10 had flanked into the same killing shape from the other side without a word. Do not do that again, she snapped from a scrub of undergrowth. The arm thing. Talk to me first. Why? Naruto whispered back, alive with the stupid exhilarating calm that happens when you survive a thing you shouldn't have. You jealous of my fashion? I can help you keep your you in your head when you pull that trick, Ino said, fierce, offhand, like telling him the time. You sloughed off more than skin just now. Close the door. He didn't ask how she knew. He breathed the pattern Hinata had given him, pressed his tongue to the roof of his mouth, and imagined the door closing like a soft click. The echo chatter that Somit. Imes rose when he took too much went from riot to a roomful of people agreeing to be quiet. Thanks, he said. Don't make me say you're welcome, Ino said. It's implied. 3 root masks went down, not killed. Tagged with their own tags in a way Tenten would have appreciated. Naruto felt them being retrieved by a net of cool intent that didn't belong to the forest. Someone else's leash tugged. Someone else got bored of losing and tugged harder. Hours later, sweaty and not dying, Team 7 hit a clearing and the hair on Naruto's forearms lifted with warning it didn't need. Wind turned strange. Leaves rotated in sympathy, bowing without breeze. Orochimaru arrived the way a good lie does, from a direction you aren't looking. He wasn't waving banners or hissing laughter. He was quiet. That's W. Had made the skin along Naruto's spine crawl. The hunger inside him liked Orochimaru like a cat likes the smell of a warm engine. Naruto put his palm against a tree trunk to remind himself of bark. Uchiha, Orochimaru said, amused like a teacher telling a story he knows will go wrong. And the Jinchuriki, and the, hello. Naruto didn't smile. He stepped so that Sakura's line of retreat wouldn't get cut if things cut. Sasuke's shoulder tightened minutely in a way that would have made a worse friend grab it and say something useless. Naruto didn't touch him. Business, Naruto said, as if Hey, we're in a shop and Orochimaru was here to buy rope. Curiosity, Orochimaru said. His tongue made the word greasy. And a thesis on what people can become when their edges are redrawn. Write it about someone else, Naruto said. He moved first because predators like him don't deserve the luxury of waiting. He grew nothing dramatic. He grew a second skin over the first and ran wrong like hee-haw. D on graduation night. Angles that made a mess of good technique, leverage invested in places human bodies don't list on their diagrams. He went for the wrist that carried a seal he didn't recognize and D the throat that carried a hymn he didn't like. Orochimaru let him get as far as pleasure. Then Orochimaru opened his mouth and bit. It wasn't teeth. It was an idea pressed into flesh that wanted to become that idea, because that's what skin does when words tell it a story violently enough. The curse mark sketched itself along the left side of Naruto's neck with a graceless calligraphy. The virus. Inside him. If virus is too small a word for a thing that drinks patterns and decides which ones to become, turned and bit back. The world stopped being wood and air and became a debate. Naruto's chakra sparked and grabbed and said mine. The new thing said ours if I say so. The curse said belong. The virus said consume. Naruto said no, not shouted, stated, the way you tell your hand to open and it O's because that's what hands do for you after a lifetime. The mark stuttered. It attempted to overlay a shape. The blacklight inside Naruto took fast copies, ripped out the parts it hated, filed the rest. Orochimaru's eyes narrowed a fraction, retreating excitement, then interest layered over interest. He had found something new and that pleased him in a way the world should not let be normal. Sasuke's fire cut the argument dirty. Sakura hauled Naruto by the collar, field smart as a blade. Naruto coughed myrrh and bitterness and laughed because he hadn't died, and life is funny like that when you're 19 and reckless. Orochimaru's head tilted. Fascinating, he purred, and when he struck again he went for Sasuke. The mark went where it went in the story everyone knows, and it was uglier. Because Naruto watched it happen knowing he had half-parried his own. Hate flared in him so clean it sang. He nearly did the easy thing. He nearly consumed the thing's hand and took the recipe for tea. He marked out of it and threw it back wrong. He didn't. He chose not to be a person for whom the answer to a violation is theft. Run, Sakura shouted. They did. Not cowardice. Tactics. Kakashi slammed into the scene moments later like a gate closing. Sharingan already open, the weight of a man who has no more patience for kids being stepped on in front of him. The forest decided to be somewhere else. They made the tower by Bikori luck and Sakura's unglamorous competence. Naruto came through the doors with his breath in order because Hinata was there with hers and he borrowed faith like you borrow a match. Naruto, Ino said softly when she caught sight of his neck. He didn't get you. He tried, Naruto said, and smiled in a way that made it a promise he intended to keep. Preliminaries smell like dust and anticipation. The hall had seen too many fights and had the dignity for more. The rules were simple enough that people would try to pretend they were complicated. Uzumaki Naruto vs Inuzuka Kiba, the proctor called. Bored like a man ordering lunch. Kiba grinned around his gum and cracked his neck like he'd rented that noise from someone cooler. Akamaru yipped like a partner. Reminding a partner to keep the game light. You sure? Kiba said as they squared. You look like you brought a glove to a dogfight. I brought a glove to a dogfight, Naruto said. I'm not the smart one on my team. Fair, Sakura said from the stands, not loud, not quiet. The first exchange belonged to Kiba. Fast, honest, a clean feint that knocked Naruto's front foot into a stumble that he tended not to feel, and Kiba didn't pretend to have missed. Akamaru hit Naruto's shoulder and used it like a springboard to hit his jaw, which isn't a ninja thing so much as a dog thing and more effective for it. Naruto let himself grin. He unfurled the slightest of edges along the soles of his feet, tendril tiny filaments that bit stone like a gecko's toes. He bounced where Kiba expected him to anchor, pulled where Kiba expected him to push, and the small differences made big mistakes. Whoa, Kiba said, skidding. You cheating with plants. Cheating with good shoes, Naruto said, and slid in. Side Kiba's reach to flick him under the ear with insultingly gentle speed. Tag, Kiba snarled, dropped play, and brought the feral. Good, you never want to take everything away from a man, you want him to show you how much of him stays when you strip him down to nothing but the part that wants to be here. Kiba stayed a lot. Naruto moved wrong again, and wrong beat fast. He didn't sprout claws. He didn't sprout anything. He let his own built shape do what it had learned, and the rest was angles and willingness to not look cool doing it. He put Kiba down with a twist that didn't break anything and left bruises where bruises instruct. Akamaru licked Kiba's nose, offended and loyal. Kiba lay on his back and squinted up. "You're so annoying, Brand," Naruto said, and offered a hand. Kiba took it without remembering not to. Then remembered and scowled harder to make up for it. Temari leaned on the railing, watching with a professional's interest. The wind from her fan lifted a curl from Naruto's forehead protector. "That was ugly," she called. "Winning is very ugly up close," Naruto called back. "Try not to make it a personality," she returned, but her mouth twitched. Later, when a HT in the ring turned sour and a kid in the stands got shoved too hard by someone cheering wrong, Naruto caught the child before they fell down the steps and set them back on their feet like placing a bowl on a shelf. Ino materialized beside him in the tilt of a breath because she had been tracking everyone's tilt for an hour. She looked up into his face too close. Her pupils narrowed the way they do when you look into a well and see your reflection is not alone. Hunter Sense doesn't care about propriety, mind arts don't either. She brushed against his echo storm. The clamor of borrowed edges that sometimes try to claim his, felt it. Didn't flinch. "If you're a monster," she said cool as winter tea, "you're the kind that hands out blankets. Keep handing them out." He snorted, relieved for reasons he wasn't going to examine in a public stairwell. "You flirt like a therapist." "I triage like one," Ino said, which was not the same thing but sounded better. The finals bracket unfurled like a promise and a trap. The village packed around the arena. The sky wore clouds thin enough to call decorative. A wind from the west played with banners and everyone led it because it made nerves feel like pageantry. "Uzumaki Naruto vs Hyuga Neji," the proctor intoned. Naruto stepped into the ring and felt the world try to weigh him again. He declined. Neji's eyes were winter cloth, neat and merciless. A man who had decided on a story and kept deciding it with every breath. "Fate," Neji said simply, "because some people like knives so much they name them fate and pretend they're not holding them." "Choice," Naruto said, "because some people like knives and choose where to put them." They bowed because the ritual protects us from ourselves and because Sakura was watching and would be disappointed if they didn't. Neji moved like water made of rules. Naruto's first 3 steps were wrong enough that Neji's eyebrows decided not to be raised. He took the gentle fist, taps that care too much about precise places, and he had learned enough from Hinata's careful hands-on evenings when training had turned to breath that he could do the one thing you're not supposed to do when someone is trying. To turn your chakra off. He changed what he was. Not big, not dramatic. At the moment Neji's palm kissed a tenketsu, Naruto softened his own channels, not like stone but like silt in water. The K landed like a spat word on a man who isn't listening. Pain is still pain. He took it and didn't let it write his story. He wrapped his forearms in cushioning grown thin as paper but tough as woven bamboo. When Neji tried to collect his surgery, Naruto gave him gloves instead of open skin. The rhythm changed. "You're insolent," Neji said, not angry. "Pleased to be offended." "I prefer optimistic," Naruto said, and tasted laughter flutter along the arena's rim like an updraft. He could have sprouted spines, could have grown blades, could have done the thing that made people choose to be afraid instead of choose to watch. He didn't. He built a shape under his palm, a Rasengan not taught but learned the way a river learns its banks, by rubbing against them until both are changed. It wasn't smooth. It had little teeth because he had little teeth in him now. He hated them, sometimes. He used them, carefully. He did not stick it into Neji's chest. He grew a lattice from it, a flower of force. That unfolded around Neji the way a teacher corrals a student's fury into a shape that gives back pressure without breaking bones. It tore the ground to chalk. It lifted Neji and set him down crooked. A step away from what he thought his feet were going to do. Hinata's gasp from the stands was not fear. It was a soft yes. Neji's breath hitched. Something moved behind his eyes. He saw a door he hadn't seen before. People like Neji don't always open doors when shown them. But they remember. He adjusted. He came in again, tighter, using the lessons of 30 seconds ago like he'd always owned them. Naruto laughed out loud. Respect always sounds a little bit like joy when you're both alive enough to earn it. Stop playing with him, someone hissed in the stands. Temari snorted and folded her FA. N closed with a clap like a period at the end of a cocky sentence. He's not. Naruto ended it without humiliation. A rush that slid under a palm like a note under a door, a twist that borrowed Neji's momentum and put it on the ground where it belonged. He didn't put his knee on Neji's throat. He didn't make the point that he could. He stood, offered a hand like he'd offered Kiba. For a slow, expensive heartbeat. Neji stared at it and saw the whole weight of a clan on the palm of a boy he'd underestimated. He took it. The stadium breathed like a single animal and then forgot how to for a second. That was when the bells tolled. Not temple bells. The opposite of temple bells. A quiet chiming that landed in your nerves and told them what to do because it had a writ for them, because someone in a robe had written a line and said it was the law of how your blood moved. The man who walked onto the sand did it without hurry and without making force. Which is why everyone felt it. He wore clothes that were wound like sutras and not a single prayer bead where anyone could see it. His head was shaved not recently, not perfectly, like a pen that knows it will be written with again soon. Bells hung at his left wrist, 3, each the size of a plum pit. They didn't ring when he walked because he had decided not to let them. When he bowed, they whispered like a promise to erase. Auditor Sanzo Kuruma, he said without looking up, as if reminding the air of a fact, and the air agreed. Jonin dropped around the ring's rim like rain that had read the weather report. Anbu took station in shadows that had been keeping places for them all day. Danzo's absence felt present. The Hokage straightened in his chair without taking authority back from his spine. Sanzo didn't draw a weapon. He walked to a cluster of genin near the stair and put his knuckles together in a little temple courtesy to a boy with his face safely anonymous under a borrowed Hittite. You, he said, and the bells kissed once. The boy froze. Root training is good, it can't win against being seen correctly. Sanzo lifted the boy's sleeve without ugliness. A small brand slept on his forearm, the kind bureaucrats stamp into documents to make them official. Sanzo put a fingertip on it, closed his eyes, and took a breath. When he exhaled, the brand unmade itself like a mistake corrected. For the record, Sanzo said gently to the ring and to the watching village, we do not hunt children to get to a man. He turned then, and his gaze found Naruto like it had known where he was born. Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto's hand flexed by reflex. The copper ring under his skin answered with a pulse so small only he could feel it. Sanzo did not smile and did not smile. By writ of the Pure Land Commission and the daimyo's seal, you were to be contained for examination and, if necessary, excision. For the safety of the world. For the safety of who tells the world what it is, Naruto said, tone light like a leaf that can cut you if it hits your eye. No. Several hundred people forgot to pretend this wasn't exactly as bad as it looked. Sanzo raised a palm. Vacuity chains unspooled from the quiet between seconds. Links of not quite silver that were more prayer than metal. They fell toward Naruto with gravity that wasn't gravity so much as the weight of decision made by a committee and signed in ink too expensive to waste on being wrong. Naruto didn't grow knives. He didn't roar because roaring would be for him and this needed to be for everybody else. He lifted his hand and felt the copper ring that Tenten had etched bite bone like a kiss. The lattice of his gauntlet printed the pattern through his skin like a stamp. When the chains met his palm, they changed their minds for half a breath, and half. A breath is enough when you've made yourself that kind of person. He caught a link. It felt like grabbing a parchment that wanted to unwrite you. The ring under his skin sang back a single ugly syllable. He had learned to love for how effective it was at ruining smooth arguments. Number. The chain's prayer stuttered. Naruto yanked. The links rang. The bells at Sanzo's wrist answered. 1, 2, not the T. Heard, and the chain broke with a sound like a thought reconsidered. No one moved. Then everyone moved. Anbu shifted weight to the balls of their feet. Jonin ghosted a step closer to themselves. Civilia. NS leaned forward on chairs that weren't built to hold armies. Temeri's smile was wider now, sharp delight at competence that refuses to sit down when asked politely. Sakura breathed once, twice, and set her stance to intervene with brains first, knives later. Sasuke's Sharingan had already spun cold and distant. His jaw worked, calculation loud because blood was loud and had names it wanted to carve. Sanzo did one wise and infuriating thing. He bowed to the Hokage, low enough that his spine told you what respect could try to do if it were a knife. Lord Hokage, he said, I will make my petition in your office. I will not spill this sand. He looked at Naruto and let the smallest sigh escape, the kind men make when they wanted to be wrong and find they are not. We will return to this. He bells didn't ring as he left because he did not let them. The ring under Naruto's skin cooled. Konoha tried to pretend to be an exam again. It did not succeed entirely. People don't pretend well AF. Chair watching someone almost be renamed in front of them. The rest you know in headlines because history always makes itself digestible for people who didn't have to taste it. The finals became a stage for a different play. The sky put on enemy banners. Sound moved like a plague someone had paid too much for. The third fought a man who had once been a student and who had decided to become an author instead. When the smoke cleared, the old weight was gone and the village had a hole in it where a grandfather's laugh had been. Naruto carried civilians out of dust 3 at a time and used his body like a bridge made of muscle and promises. He did not go to sleep when the fighting stopped because the fighting never stops, it just changes shoes. He went where he was told because the person telling him had sand on her boots and knew the price of wind. Tsunade came back like a threat you write for hospitals and keep for gods. She stood behind the Hokage desk the way the desk was supposed to be. Stood behind. As if it were a thing that needed to be kept between her and the world for the world's sake, not hers. The smell of sake in the tower changed from ache to ritual. Naruto expected to be summoned and lectured and labeled. He was summoned. He was not lectured. Sit, Tsunade said, and sat first. Her eyes swept him, not just for scars and not just for lies. She rubbed her thumb and forefinger together once the way gamblers do when they feel the air change at a table. The commission will come with better chains, she said. Root will bring them a key. I don't bless either. I don't end them either because telling people not to do a thing is a mouth exercise when they can do it quieter without permission. Naruto waited. He didn't smart mouth because the ache of the third's missing. Chair sat beside him like a person he didn't want to disappoint. I want proof, Tsunade said. Not rumors, not the taste you get in your mouth when bad men walk past you. I want the names written in the right ink. Bring me what I can slam on a table between me and a man who likes his robe too much. If you run toward that. The quiet in Naruto's chest unclenched a notch. Yes, you won't do it alone. She smiled like a cliff. It wasn't kind, it was kind not to be. She set a scroll on the desk between them. The wax was unmarked. This says I trust you, she said. It's blank because I do. He didn't reach for it. Take it, she said, and when he did, the weight of blankness felt heavier than orders ever had. On the steps of the tower, Hinata waited without looking like she was waiting. Tenten leaned against the rail and pretended not to care how the prototype had performed, which is to say she cared like fire cares about air. Ino watched the street and the people on it and watched Naruto arrive and had something soft in her face she was not going to explain to him yet because he hadn't earned it yet, not from her. You looked pretty, Tenten said. Shiny and defiant. The ring sang. It did, Naruto said. You want your manual. I want anecdotes I can turn into parts, she said. Hinata stood close enough that their sleeves almost had reason to brush. He'll give you data, she offered, quiet. And I'll count his breaths. Ino snorted. And I'll count his mistakes. Rude, Naruto said amiably. But fair. Tamari walked up the steps whistling something she'd invented. She didn't stop. She just nudged him with her shoulder hard enough to move him. You looked less stupid than I expected in the ring, she said. Try to keep it up. Thank you for your generous praise, he said. Don't blow your arm off. She added. If you do I won't carry you. I'll make Konkuro do it. He complains more. It's funnier. Kakashi appeared in their circle like people appear in circles they have already been invited to. He looked at Tsunade's door, then at Naruto's empty hands, then at the blank scroll tucked under Naruto's arm. He didn't nod. He didn't need to. Mission, he said around the word like it had flavor. Naruto lifted the scroll. Proof. Kakashi hummed. Bring it back. That's the plan, Naruto said, and for the first time since Bells had tried to decide who he was, his smile fit his face all the way. He went home by a route that let him see the bridge builders stacking new timber in the morning light and the tea sellers arguing about boiling time and a kid teaching another kid to climb a wall by failing loudly. He wrote nothing on the scroll yet. It would be easy to write something. It would be hard to write the thing that mattered. He wanted the latter. The hunger in him wanted the former because the former is fast. He told it, not unkindly, to wait its turn. At his door, he paused. Across the way, a lacquer bead sat on a roof tile and pretended to be a bead and not a little spy with legs. It didn't move. It waited to know what the next line of its orders would ask it to be. Bug season, Naruto said conversationally. He didn't crush this one. He had proof to collect. And sometimes the best proof is a bug that thinks it's invisible and is not. He put the blank scroll on his low table. He washed his hands. He breathed the form Hinata had give. Him and dust shook itself to the floor like a small decision made. He looked at the copper ring's shadow under his skin and liked it there. He listened to the echoes, and they were quieter, not because they'd finally decided to be good, but because he had decided to be. He would define himself in motion. He had an auditor to outmaneuver, a route to dig out of his own forest, and a god he didn't know about yet writing his name in the margin of a ledger. He grinned, bare teeth, friendly, a warning, a promise, a hello. Let's go pick a fight with a vocabulary, he said to the empty room, and felt the room grin back. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Quiet Lab and the Loud Promise. The rain in grass country smelled like bad memory and laundry soap. Naruto tasted both as he lay flat on a damp roof, up under a sagging tarred awning and watched the tannery breathe. It wasn't a tannery, not really. Real tanneries are honest. They stink in a way that admits guilt. This place had the right piles of bark chips and vats. The right pale hides hung to dry, and none of the flies. The vats steamed with a sweet temple incense that had no business near leather. Workers moved with the attention of people who were being watched by someone who doesn't like being disappointed. Hinata tapped the roof with one finger 3 times. In his mind's eye her Byakugan laid a pale map over the world. Walls like ribs, empty rooms like lungs. She whispered without moving her mouth. 2 floors. Lower level has a corridor with thicker air. Metal. Bars. No. Tubes. People on cots. 10. Maybe 11. One chakra signature is red. Unstable. Security. Kakashi asked from where the gutter shadow pretended not to hold him. 6 outside, 5 inside, Hinata said. 2 patrols. 1. Different. The prayers on his robe are wrong. Tenten crowded in next to Naruto, her breath a clean, quick heat. She set a small lacquered case between them and flipped it open. Inside lay a handful of stubby cylinders and a flat disc etched with 16 tiny spokes. Door clamps are ready. 2-minute charge on the anchors. If we don't crack the locks by then, we live here now. Ino's voice floated up from the alley where she lay, Ned against a barrel like a person who had never been nervous in her life. I can make a guard decide to check the wrong corner for 30 seconds. 60 if he's the type who lists groceries while on duty. Tamari stood under the awning's far eave, arms folded, wind tugging the loose ends of her waist sash. She looked like a person who trusted physics and not much else. You said different, she said to Hinata. How different? Hinata wet her lips, a rare tell. He's wearing null sutras. They cancel. Not jutsu exactly, but the part of you that decides to be a jutsu. The effect radius looks slippery. Priest scientist, Kakashi murmured. You don't see those every day. You see the things they ruin, though. Naruto flexed his fingers. The copper ring under his skin, a circle Tenten had etched. And he had grown into himself, pulsed once like it could sense its opposite. The hunger inside him nosed at the edge of his ribs, curious. He breathed the kata Hinata had taught him until curiosity stopped feeling like a leash. Quiet in, quiet out, Kakashi said. No speeches, unless you're me. No unnecessary heroics, unless you're him. He nodded at Naruto. We've got 11 people who didn't ask to be here. We're not leaving them. Naruto rolled his shoulder. Easy. We never leave them. He took the downspout instead of the ladder, hands and feet finding grips where there shouldn't be any. The tannery's yard held stacks of wood and a boy with a broom who hummed to keep fear out of his teeth. Naruto passed him like a rumor, palms and shadow. Ino's hum of a suggestion slid over a guard. You should check the left gate. Isn't there a creak? The guard frowned in the exact way you do when your own brain tricks you and obeyed himself. Naruto reached the rear door. The hinges were new, wick. H is the sort of thing no one ever notices until the day it matters. He pressed the disc Tenten had given him to the seam where the door sat against the sill. The spokes glowed in a circle, one by one, tiny foxfire teeth. The lock's bolt sighed open. Marry me, he whispered to the disc. Consent is required, Tenten murmured in his ear, smug across the wire. Also diamonds. Move. He moved. Inside, the tannery stopped pretending. The incense sharpened to temple sour. The floorboards changed from cheap pine to ceramic squares laid with monk patience. He didn't step on the dark ones. He didn't know why he knew not to. He trusted that kind of knowing. The corridor took a breath as he entered and then held it. He felt the Null Sutra before it touched him, the pressure of somebody else's certainty. The copper ring in his palm warmed and bit bone, not to hurt, just to remind him he was the one who named his edges. He kept his chakra small, thread thin, tucked, not stone, not water, just Naruto. The pressure decided he wasn't worth erasing yet and slid past, peeved. Hinata's soft left took him into a long room where metal-framed narrow beds and bodies lay in a parade of not sleep. Inked sutras circled the room, carefully mascopied. The people on the beds had been cleaned and combed. That was worse. Care that forgets consent is a ritual, not love. A girl with red hair lay at the far end, hands bound with a triple wrap of prayer cord. Sensors feel like weather. This girl felt like a storm standing still. The closer he got, the more the hair on his arms wanted to rise. The copper ing thrummed agreement. This one is like you, wrong in a way that keeps being right. A priest in linen leaned over her, fingers poised above her collarbone, lips moving. His prayer sounded like a law written to be fair and used to crush. That which is added shall be subtracted. Math later, Naruto said, and bumped the man with his shoulder hard enough to put him into a wall without rearranging anything inside him. The Null Sutra bit him full in the ribs. Chakra turned to sand under his skin. His gauntlet, habit now, and armor his bones would grow at the idea, flickered and guttered. He could have tried to push back. He didn't. He made the choice he'd trained for since Hinata put breathing into his hands. He moved without chakra. The priest threw a square of paper at his eyes. It fluttered, sweet as confetti, and hit him like a sack of static. His visual sense went gray-white with temple snow. He kept going anyway. You don't stop when someone turns out the lights. You keep your hands on the rope. He slammed the priest to the floor with a shoulder and slid his forearm across the man's throat, not to crush but to remind him of consequences. The priest pawed for his robe sleeve with panic and purpose. Naruto caught the movement, pinned the wrist, and the whisper of ink under paper turned into a hiss. The prayer he'd interrupted tried to finish itself. The copper ring scratched a rude syllable against Naruto's bones. The prayer stumbled, forgot its words, died of embarrassment. Hey, Naruto said to the girl on the cot, breath quickening now that his body was catching up to the fact that he'd just bullied a liturgy with his shoulder. You good. Her eyes snapped open like door latches. They were red in a way that had nothing to do with blood, and everything to do with being Uzumaki. He felt her feel him, sense her to anomaly, and make a decision about him that she didn't bother to hide. You're loud, she said simply. Her voice was clear, a blade warmth under smoke. You're welcome, Naruto said. I didn't say thank you. Rude. Busy. Footsteps rushed in the corridor. Hinata's hands flashed at the door in a blur of soft palms. Two guards fell like they'd remembered other appointments. Sakura slipped past them and went straight to pulse, to pupils, to fingers at throat, the measurements of a person who can tell what you can pay and what you can't. Tenten rolled in behind her, already unspooling a seal cord. Gimme your wrists, Red. I'll offend these knots. The Uzumaki girl tilted her chin. Karen. And don't call me Red. Stop calling me loud. You are loud. Tenten looped the cord, muttering happy nonsense. The prayer knots resisted like spring vines. She froze, eyes narrowing. Oh, that's interesting. If you say that when defusing a seal again, Sakura said without looking up from a man's eyelid she was holding to the light, I will staple your mouth closed. It's braided in reverse, Tenten said, more delighted now. Whoever wrote this wanted people to pretend it didn't exist. Cute. Kakashi's shadow filled the doorway. Outside's not dead, he said, like the weather. Enko's having fun at the gate. We've got 2 minutes of polite distraction before it becomes impolite. Ino's voice smoothed through the room. Room's clear. I'm with the boy who hums when he's scared. He's got a key in his shoe and a note in his teeth. Neat. Naruto looked back at the priest under his arm. The man had spent years practicing calm, but failed at it like a rich man pretending to enjoy porridge. Who signed your orders? Naruto asked. Light. The priest's G.A.'s skittered around Naruto's face and landed nowhere. Panic made him boring. You don't know what you are, he whispered in awe and terror. You are, misfiled. Yeah, Naruto said. I don't fit your drawers. Who signed? The man clamped lips shut like prayer. Hinata's hand brushed Naruto's elbow. Not a stop. A pulse. Remember you. He did. He had a tool for this, and he hated the part of him that loved how good a tool it was. He pressed his other palm to the man's neck and took a sip. Echoes staggered him. Polite sandals, ink warmed in a sleeve, the slow chant of the Null Sutra that had gotten a man through grief. Then through execution. Then through the idea that maybe prayer could be used like a knife if you called it a spoon. He took only what he needed, and less. A ledger. A seal lodged in wax. A name carved on a stamp. The priest gasped as if Naruto had stolen air. Ino's mind brushed Naruto's like a hand catching a falling cup and set his grip right there. He thanked her without words. She scowled without moving her face. Commissioner Riku, Naruto said, blinking away the grit of too many lives. Grand Auditor. He grimaced. That's a lot of title to fit on a prayer bead. Rin sat up as Tenten snapped the last reversed knot. She studied Naruto the way a surgeon studies a new tool she might hate but will use because the alternative is a dead body. She took his hand without asking permission and bit his wrist. Hey, Naruto yelped. Karen's eyes fluttered with relief, not lust, which somehow made it weirder. Something that had been thrashing inside Naruto like a fish in a bucket settled with a shiver. The Null Sutra's residual grit melted out of his system in a sigh he tasted between his teeth. You were about to spiral, Karen said, as if diagnosing a cough. Your pattern was fraying at the edges. Tart. I hate it. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, disgusted with herself for needing it and more disgusted that it helped. You run hot. Try not to explode. Tenten blinked between them. Did you just bite my client to tune his engine? Do you have a better wrench? Karen shot back, raw. The tough didn't hide the relief like she'd crawled out of weeks of bad air and found a window. Hinata's gaze had sharpened at the first flash of teeth and softened at the first exhale. Better, she asked Naruto. Better, he said, and the word landed on all of them like a small shared breath. The priest tried to crawl. Kakashi tapped his temple with 2 fingers. Sleep, and the man obeyed the suggestion with swaying gratitude. Burn it, Karen said, voice flat. After we take proof, Naruto said. Names, orders, who gets paid? Karen pointed with her chin toward a cabinet the room was pretending to ignore. Ledgers in there, second shelf, fake back. If you take it, run. Tenten's door anchors sighed the way machines do before the work begins to hurt. She tossed Naruto a paper roll with 3 kanji stamped across it, borrowed time. Make it count. They took the ledger. It was heavier than it should have been, like a voice that had learned to carry. Tenten slid seal cord across the room's 4 corners and instead of drawing sigils she stapled C. MPLE facts into the wood. There are people here, they get to leave. Seals are smarter than you think if you speak to them like they aren't stupid. The tannery woke up. Gray-clad guards in Commission B. Luz flowed through the corridor with the calm of people who believed righteousness made them bulletproof. Sanzo Kuruma wasn't among them. These wore their prayers loud. Banners of vacuity fluttered in the doorframe and changed the way light fell. The ring under Naruto's skin hissed like a cat. He grinned, because proof is proof. He didn't fight in the light. He pulled bodies into corners that were friendly to him and unfriendly to men holding banners. He cut the line of a sutra with a fingernail because Tenten had drawn look here, cut here in his head last week, and Hinata had checked the angle twice. Sakura shepherded people out of beds and into the lane with hands that moved too fast to be gentle and too precise to be called anything else. Naruto, Ino said in his ear, a little breathless, as she rode two men's minds like a river and a reed boat at once. You've got three coming who aren't dumb and one who is. Shame about the one. I'll hold the shame, he said, and planted his palm on the arch of the corridor. He grew a lattice from himself into the stone. Not spikes, not drama, just an extra rib, an unplanned beam. The first of the three smart ones hit it with a grunt that said he'd met worse and won. The second tripped over the first. The third chose to pray. Ino caught the prayer mid-word and changed the ending. He fell asleep with a frown. Burn it? Karen asked again from the doorway, standing with her back turned toward the world like a woman who had used up all the patience she had. Burn it, Kakashi said. Karen smiled without joy, the way a woman smiles when she gets to choose the fire. They left the tannery to its smoke. Enko's laugh came from the gate like a bell with a crack in it, prettier for being wrong. Naruto didn't look back. People who watch their OWN fires too long fall in love with the color. They made the tree line. The ledger weighed Naruto's bag like a promise and like an anchor, and those are the same thing more often than you want to admit. They slept in a stand of young pines that creaked like they were learning to be trees. Karen woke in the middle of the night, stared at the sky as if it owed her an apology, and then rolled over. Slept the kind of sleep you can only do once you've decided not to die. In the morning she sat on a fallen log and watched Tenten boil water and watched Naruto watch Hinata wrap bandage tape around his wrist where the bite had gone small and neat. You're weird, Karen said to all of them. Correct, Tamari said dryly. We are a touring circus and you are the knife thrower who tells us we're CK-less while throwing knives in a rainstorm. Karen twitched the corner of her mouth. I'm staying until I know where they sent the others. Then I might set your tent on fire. Welcome to the team, Ino said, stretching, eyes closed. Coffee. Karen accepted a tin cup like you accept a treaty, carefully, without making eye contact. Naruto sat beside her. If he'd planned to say something big and healing, he forgot it and did something better. He bumped her shoulder with his and said nothing. Karen bumped back because sometimes the body says yes without waiting on the brain. They opened the LEDG. When the steam off the pot died and the flies decided to try their luck. It was as boring as sin and as damning as it should be. Columns of dates and incense orders and sutra paper in bulk and, tucked between honest items. Numbers that didn't belong in a monastery. Field restraints, vacuity chain links, donor stipends, a euphemism so loud it was a siren. Names scrawled their assent in tidy little men's hands. A seal at the bottom pressed the paper like a bruise. Grand Auditor Cassie Riku. Proof, Kakashi said. Good ink. It won't smear. Naruto traced the seal without touching it. The there was complicated not because it had to be, but because it wanted to be admired. He felt the weight of a man who believed in being correct more than being kind. He decided to hate him in a way that would be useful later. Tamari tipped her head toward the southwest. The wind daimyo's court is 2 days if we push. Tsunade wants to look this man in the eye and not be alone when she does. Suna can host without pretending to agree. We like leverage. We like mischief. And, she added, smirking, I like watching arrogant men try to hold on to fans in a storm. Summit, Kakashi said. Fine. He looked at Naruto. You're not the message. You're not the messenger. You're the reason we can survive both. Naruto blew on his coffee. Cool job title. The road to Suna ran through towns that had learned to live on a budget of water and patience. Tamari knew them all and none of them were fooled by her casual wave. They brought baskets of hot stones wrapped in cloth to warm beds without wasting firewood. Naruto lifted barrels because lifting barrels is diplomacy too. Hinata bartered medicinal honey for a string of dates. Ino sat on a stoop with an old woman and listened to a story about a husband who had run away and returned as a better man with a smaller pride. Sakura taught a girl to wrap a sprained wrist. Tenten traded a 3-throw knife lesson for a set of washers turned out a boy with a lathe in his father's shed. Karen walked the edge of town and counted wells like rosaries and came back having decided not to leave the team today. At the night market, Tamari bought Same cakes, and handed one to Naruto without looking at him. He took a bite and made a face. This is terrible, he said through a mouthful of sesame in judgment. It's the best in 3 provinces, Temari said. It tastes like regret. You're not required to like what I like, she said, but she watched him finish it anyway and rolled her eyes when he did. They stood shoulder to shoulder watching a potter throw a bowl shaped like the moon. Temari tipped her head toward the ledger tucked under Naruto's arm and then toward the market. Acceptable loss, she said conversationally. Define it. He didn't answer with numbers. He looked at the potter's hands. It's the thing I don't write on the page because I'm the one who pays it, he said. Not them. Temari's smile went crooked. Careful, that'll make you popular. I'm already popular, he said, and dodged the elbow she didn't throw. They left before dawn, because the commission liked to get up early to ruin people's mornings. The Nagates took them in with the grating sigh of sand wood. Puppeteers eyed Naruto like a new hinge. The air in the palace had a scale to it, a dryness that belonged to stone that had outlived stories and intended to outlive theirs. The wind daimyo looked like a man who liked silk and did not like being made to feel small for it. He read the ledger with the performative frown of a governor being forced to see how sausage is made. Tsunade sat across from him with her haori folded back and her hands open on the table like a gambler showing clean sleeves. Temari stood between them and made herself into a wind that could tip a heavy thing without breaking it. We don't force shrines, she reminded the room. We remember that gods are people with too many birthdays. Sanzo Kuruma did not come. In his place came men with clean fingernails and bells that did not ring unless told to, and one woman with her hair in a knot so precise it looked cut from amber. They brought a writ written on thick paw, her with deckled edges and ink heavy enough to smell. It said the same thing Sanzo had said on the sand in Konoha, for the safety of the world. It added footnotes. Footnotes always make cruelty look educated. Naruto didn't speak. He stood one step behind Tsunade's left shoulder and did what the job demanded. Be large without making it about him. He watched the woman with the amber hair and saw the moment she decided to stop listening and wait for her turn to talk. He watched Temari's fan tilt a half-inch and saw 3 men change their minds about how this meeting would go. The trap sprang between courtesies. The palace bells didn't toll. They hummed. A tone like a plucked string vibrated through stone and into teeth. The doors to the hall didn't close, because closing is noisy, they slowed. Vacuity banners unrolled from hidden niches in the ceiling and draped the room in polite death. The first wave of commission auditors stepped through with non-lethal faces. Their prayers were designed to avoid blood on white marble. Containment, said a voice by the doors. For the safety of your paperwork, Tsunade said, and stood before he finished. Temari didn't open her fan. She cracked it once. A thunderclap on a clear day, and the balance of the room tipped toward her side. Tenten snapped a case open and dropped 4 little anchors at the corners of the rug. Naruto Fei. LT their teeth grabbed the floor and cheat the math of someone else's field. Hinata's shoulders rolled back and the veins at her temples fluttered with focus. Ino's breath steadied like a hand hovering over a heartbeat about to drop. The banners made ninjutsu feel like guilt. Naruto didn't fight them with chakra. He fought their geometry. He cut the room into triangles with his body. He grew nothing dramatic, just bracing. Ribs for a space, a second beam under a door lintel, a shelf where Ino could set a man's mind for a heartbeat and come back to it without it falling. The copper ring burned at his palm and the vacuity chain that had been meant to settle on his shoulders settled on the anchor Tenten had hidden under the edge of the carpet instead. It rang once like a wind chime that regretted its life choices. The woman with the amber hair saw her neat plan become a messy fight and lifted a hand to change the story. Hinata moved first. Soft, precise, a 2-finger strike into a prayer bead. On the woman's wrist that wasn't a bead at all but an anchor for the field. The bead cracked. The field hiccuped. Kakashi's shadow got long and took a man's legs out from under him like it had been waiting for this carpet all afternoon. We're leaving, Temari informed the room, crisp as law. You can have the tea set after. The auditors weren't sloppy. They didn't bleed honor on the floor to prove a point. They used the tools they'd brought and the positions they'd purchased with polite conversation and pushed the way a tide does when it's being paid. Naruto didn't try to outpray them. He out-leveraged them. He moved furniture with elbows. He put a chair in a doorway in the exact wrong place for a chain to swing. He picked up a heavy brass brazier and made it a shield without a chakra G. Low to announce that's what he was doing. Left, now, Ino said into his ear, a suggestion more than a command. He stepped left and a prayer intended to numb him kissed air instead and kissed Tenten's anchor for a hot second and learned regret. Karen's hands blurred with a brush and ink stolen from a desk, inscribing a counter-mantra along Naruto's collarbone in strokes that looked lazy and were not. Don't move, she snapped. I'm busy, he said through his teeth. Don't move or you die dumb, she said. He didn't move, he didn't die. She slashed the last stroke and the ink sank into his skin like someone else's memory. The null buzz that had been trying to shrink him to a compliant square of paper slid off. He laughed, involuntary, delighted, alive. Temari's wind went sideways, the way on. Leah Sand Shinobi can convince wind to do. It folded the room's logic. A bell tower in the inner courtyard groaned and toppled wrong, not to crush but to block a passage and change the way echo travels. The auditors' prayers got lost on their way to their targets. Out, Tsunade said, and she didn't say it like a soldier or a god. She said it like a doctor who was done arguing with death for today. And would like to buy her people one more hour where their names stay on the right page. They burst into the courtyard as the banners tried to catch up. Sand lifted of its own accord because this is a place that remembers allies. Naruto grew a shield lattice over their backs and didn't watch it take shrapnel. He kept his eyes on Hinata's shoulder blades and matched his breath to hers so his heart wouldn't try to run without him. They left proof on the floor behind them. Chains with the commission's stamp snapped at the wrong links, a prayer bead cracked by gentle fist, a ledger copy Tsunade ha. Depressed into the daimyo's palm while the room thought it was watching other things. Tamari left an invoice pinned to a pillar with a kunai. Damage fee. Billed to Cassie Riku. Pay promptly. By the time the banners caught their nerve, Team 7 and the women who made them team-shaped were 4 alleys away, then 6, then gone. They didn't stop moving until the city things became road things and E-road became scrub and the scrub became the kind of empty that listens without spying. Tamari laughed then, sharp and grateful. That felt good, she admitted. Like teaching a cat to sit. Tenten why on her back in the sand and fanned herself with a blueprint. My anchors are getting a raise. You don't get paid, Sakura said. You own the company. Then I'm buying myself a cake. Karen sat on a boulder, legs dangling. Eyes on Naruto with a scrutiny that should have been unbearable and wasn't. You're going to need that ink again, she told him, flicking 2 fingers at his collarbone. I'll bring my wrist, he said. Made the mistake of smiling, and endured the eye roll. Hinata stood in front of him and lifted 2 fingers. He didn't need the reminder and did it anyway, because ritual is not about need. He breathed with her until the echo storm in his head turned from a parade to a crowd and then from a crowd to a conversation and then from a conversation to a room with a door he saw. LD close and a window he could open if he asked. He blinked and the world came back with a good weight. Ino sat beside him without occupying the space of a person who wanted something in return. There. E was a prayer in the room that wanted to decide what kind of person you were when you walked through the door, she said, plain. You didn't let it. Keep not letting it. I'm good at that, he said. You're getting better, she corrected. Not unkind. There's a difference. Kakashi stood with a hand in his pocket and the other holding the ledger by its spine as if it might bite. We have our names, he said. He lifted the book. Cassie Riku writes like a man who expects the page to be grateful. Let's make him regret learning letters, Tamari said. Naruto reached for the ledger. Kakashi didn't make him ask twice. The leather felt like a palm. The seal at the bottom of the biggest entry burned his thumb without heat. He saw letters like tiny altars. Grand Auditor Cassie Riku. He made his VOICE light for the team and heavy for himself. All right, he said. We've got a god's accountant to annoy. Karen snorted. You wish he were an accountant. He thinks he balances everything that breathes. Then we'll unbalance him, Naruto said. He looked around. At Hinata's steady eyes, at Tenten's bright, practical delight, at Ino's soft anger held careful, at Temari's amused hunger for a fight he could respect. At Sakura's hand on her kit, ready to put people back together after he broke the world trying not to, and he felt something click that wasn't a lock. They made camp in the lee of a sandstone shelf. The ledger sat open on a flat rock like a small altar to petty evils. Naruto didn't touch it. He set Tsunade's scroll, the blank one, beside it and didn't write yet. Write later, Hinata said, knowing without looking at him what he was trying not to make into a bad habit. Right when we have a better ending, Ino added, hair down around her shoulders like a promise. Right after I build you a cross brace for that stupid shield so it stops humming at the wrong pitch, Tenten declared, already sketching. Right when it stings, Tamari said mildly, plucking a sesame seed from her teeth. Otherwise you'll be nice about it. Don't be nice. Karen looked at the ink ghost along his collarbone, frowned, and then, without theatrics, reached out and pressed 2 knuckles into the seal. The bit of ink he hadn't absorbed sank. The last of the hum went quiet. Right when the rooms in your head are quiet, she said. Sakura rolled her blanket out near the fire. Right when you've eaten, she said. Because I like you alive. He ate. He breathed. The hunger sat in his ribs and watched the fire like a well-behaved beast, tail thumping when anyone laughed and going still when voices dropped. He didn't apologize to it. He didn't feed it lies. He said the thing he'd said to it under the Hokage rock and under the tannery rafters and in the palace with banners trying to make his shape tidy. We do this my way. The night snuck up. One by one they went quiet without going lonely. Kakashi's book lay on his chest, closed, the way it does when the story you're living is better than the one you've been reading. Tamari took first watch and pretended not to enjoy it. Tenten fell asleep with a pencil in her hand and woke twice to write a note in the dark. Ino's breathing matched Sakura's by choice. Hinata's silhouette was a promise at the edge of the firelight. Naruto couldn't help himself. He looked up. The stars were soft. Someone had spilled salt on black silk and then wiped at it with a palm. He thought of ledgers and definitions and men who believe that counting a thing gives it the right to exist. He thought of a grand auditor whose name pressed paper like a thumb on a throat. He thought of Sanzo's bells and how gently they had rung and the hands that had tied them and why they hadn't rung this time. He smiled and let it be small and mean and kind. You can't count me, he told the sky, which did not answer because it had learned better. In the morning, he would take Tsunade's blank scroll and write Kasiriku on it in a hand that couldn't pretend to be neat. He will tuck it next to the ledger and not draw a line between the names yet, because lines sometimes make maps you don't want to walk. He would run toward proof again. He would make sure the people who had been on those cots had new stories to tell that had nothing to do with vows or chains or reversed knots. He would get loud when it mattered and quiet when it counted. He would pick a fight with a man whose favorite prayer was a subtraction and teach him something about sums. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Syllable of Unmaking. The border town had a sky like tin. It pressed down on roofs that had loss their paint and on a square where a water pump squealed once every time someone leaned into it, as if complaining to be included in the day. Naruto came in ahead of the others because his feet wouldn't slow. He didn't say why. No one asked. They knew the look. Shoulders with too much speed in them, eyes measuring what they hadn't seen yet. The smell hit first. Not blood, not smoke, absence. As if someone had boiled the life out of the air and hung it back up to dry. Wait, Kakashi said softly behind him, but the word didn't land. Naruto had already stepped through the low gate of the barracks. It wasn't a slaughter. That would have been easier to look at. 20 men and women lay where they'd been standing, one kneeling, one halfway through tying a sandal, one with a hand lifted to say something no one would hear. Faces peaceful, no wounds. Their Hittite lay where they had fallen off, as if shamed. Naruto's clone walked through them, light on its feet, reached for a shoulder out of habit. And winked out like a candle licked by rain. No puff of smoke, no return of memory, just gone, the way a breath is gone when you forget you were holding it. Sakura's hands hovered over a chest. Hearts are fine, she whispered. Horrified. Everything is fine, except the thing that makes everything be. Hinata's eyes pulsed with pale petals. She went still the way she goes still when she decides to see more than she's supposed to. There, empty of chakra, she said, and her voice didn't know how to be that quiet. Not sealed, not blocked, The pattern is missing. Erased. Ino guessed. Unmade. Hinata said. And Naruto felt the word eat a corner of him. He crouched by a boy who could not have been 19, who had that lit up look some shinobi get when they finally understand why their body moves the way it does. The boy's fingers were smudged with charcoal from a game of Go halfway through. Naruto put his palm to the boy's sternum, where you can sometimes hum a little energy. Back into someone who has forgotten how to be awake. Nothing. Not even the kind of nothing that comes before something. Temari stood in the door, face flat and impolite, the way she looks when rules have been used for pruning people instead of plants. Tenten didn't say anything. She just set her tool case down with gentleness it had never needed and stared a while at the dovetail joints of a cot. Karen came last and held the doorway with her mouth pressed thin. Grand Auditor, Kakashi said, not a question. Cassie Riku, or someone who carries his pen, Temari returned. A wind belled across the square, soft, indecent. A man at the pump leaned into the handle and the pump did not squeal. It made no sound at all. He blinked down at the water like it had misbehaved. Naruto stood. The hunger stalked his ribs, tail up, asking to be pointed. He breathed with the little pulse Hinata had taught him and named what he wanted, not revenge. Remedy. We don't leave them on the floor of their own day, he said. His voice didn't crack. That felt worse. They carried the soldiers into the shade and closed eyes that hadn't known to close themselves. Naruto didn't pray. He tried on 3 prayers and none fit. In the end he touched his forehead to the wood of the doorframe and said, "We're going to be inconvenient," and the building seemed to take that as a vow. On the way out, an old woman stepped head into Naruto's path with a bundle of cloth. She unrolled it without words. Incense sticks and a hand-carved stamp with the syllable mu burned into its face. Naruto felt, for a hot second, the texture of a sound he had not yet heard. Where? He asked. She pointed north. They came from the pass, she said. They left like paper leaves a table. Her eyes were not defiant. They were curious about what he would do next. We're going to go break their stamp, Temari told her, and stole a sesame cake from a vendor cart like she was buying permission from the town for the trouble that would come. Training became a spare room behind a shuttered shop and a strip of scrub outside the town in the hours between tired and too tired. Tenten strung copper wire between 4 iron stakes and inked bowls along the wire with a brush made of badger hair and stubbornness. Resonance cage, she said, seating a clamp with her heel. It'll sing at the pitch of whatever bites us and give us a second to decide not to die. What if it bites a different pitch? Ino asked, threading a ribbon through her hair. She was pretending to be casual on purpose so no one would go brittle. Then I adjust the cage, Tenten said. And we still get a second. Stop asking me to make perfect things. I'm trying to make enough things. Hinata stood close to Naruto and lifted 2 fingers. He breathed, felt stupid for needing the reminder. Did it anyway and felt less stupid. When it lands, she said, and he heard how she didn't say if, don't harden. You like to meet force. Don't. Let it pass like you do when you dodge the last 3 syllables of someone saying your name wrong. You're very good at that, Ino murmured, and Naruto grinned despite himself. Karen swabbed a line of alcohol along Naruto's collarbone and set her jaw. Don't move, she said, and when he did anyway, she pinched him until he hissed. Don't. This is a counter mantra, not a love letter. It can be both, Temari offered. Karen didn't blush. She inked a curve like a hook and a line like a road and 3 characters that meant nothing on paper and a great deal on Naruto. The ink sank into his skin with a chill like the first breath in winter. If the spear's sound gets into your bones, this will tell your bones to be rude to it. I'm getting an etiquette lesson from my collarbone, Naruto said. Good, Karen said. Learn manners. Tenten clapped her hands once. All right, we practice being wrong people. Naruto lifted a brow. We do what now? Namebreak, Ino said, like naming it would keep it from naming them first. If someone says you're a rock and you believe it, your back breaks when the river hits you. If you learn to blur, the river doesn't get a handle. Hinata took his hands from the front and Ino touched his temples from behind and the world went soft in a way that would make other people panic and made Naruto breathe. Choose who you are, Ino said, simple as an apple. Not once. At speed. How fast? he asked. Hinata's eyes were steady on his. Faster. He stood in the middle of the wire cage and let the copper hum into his bones. Tenten flicked a nail and a tone climbed his spine and made his teeth go smooth. Karen whispered the counter strokes under her breath like she was reminding Ink it had a job. Tamari stood outside the wire and let the wind play in her sleeves. Naruto split his identity like bread. Not clones. No chakra flash. Just decisions. I am hands. I am a promise. I am a boy who didn't eat what it would have been easy to eat. I am the one who asked a priest to sleep without hating him. I am the one who will count breaths while other men count money. The hunger prowled and accepted the list because its name for him was shorter, mine. It liked all the other names so long as he left room for it to breathe. Again, Hinata said, softly, as Tenten changed the tone. Again, Ino murmured, as Karen sharpened a line with a thumb. They worked until the sky lost its edge. Kakashi didn't join them inside the wire. He stood with his hands in his pockets and an eye like a closed book, counting seconds between tones and cataloging flinches. Once, he didn't say good. He said, we'll get one chance. Always so optimistic, Tamari drawled. I try not to waste it on myself, Kakashi returned. Naruto coughed copper out of his throat after the last tone passed. If you see me try to be clever with the noise, he told them, just hit me. On it, Tenten said cheerfully. The mountain pass was white. Not pretty white, postcard white. White like a table set with too much cutlery and not enough food. Banners hung from the teeth of rock, slick and colorless until you looked long enough to see motes of ink swimming in the fibers. The wind didn't bother them. They moved when they wanted to. Kumo came out of the weather in gray cloaks lined with rabbit fur. Darui looked like a man having a slow afternoon on purpose. Samui looked like a woman who would fold you in half if you inconvenienced her day. They didn't bow. They didn't need to. Tamari gave them a look that said we are all tired of polite men. You brought toys? Darui asked, eyeing Tenten's case. She brought religion that doesn't need a temple. Tamari said. Nice, Darui said, meaning it. Raikage knows. Kakashi asked. Raikage knows enough to give us a long lunch, Samui said, and the corner of her mouth twitched in the direction of humor. The first auditors in the past didn't try to kill anyone. They raised banners like schoolteachers raise charts. The prayer on the air was efficient. It asked the world to agree. The world almost did. Tenten's anchors bit into ice under stamped snow. The copper cage went up with a hiss that made the banners glance over as if being noticed were rude. Naruto watched the geometry set itself. You can call it combat if you want. It's always drawing. Lines. Angles. Where the next step will put your ankle. Auditor ranks set like a textbook illustration. Then they bent. Not with fear. With doctrine. They made a shape that didn't know how to fail because it thought failure was for lesser nouns. Form B, Tamari said, bored, and opened her fan to 2 ribs. The Pass's wind remembered it was born in deserts that worship different gods. It hit the banners from the side, not to tear them, but to make the prayers have to shout over the gust. Chain, someone called, and the vacuity links fell out of Abel's silence. They were prettier than Naruto had expected. That made it worse. Pretty things used wrong can be the ugliest. Now, Tenten said, and Naruto moved. He didn't go for heads. He went for poles. Banners are just ideas on sticks. He snapped wood with his knee and cut silk with a hand-grown ruff with microscopic teeth. Seals hummed and went whore. Say when he touched them with the copper ring. A head taller than the rest, Cassie Riku walked through his auditors like a man taking attendance. The zero mantra spear sat in his hand with the quiet hap. Finesse of a tool meeting the job it was made for. It drew no light. It drew names. When he tilted it, words wanted to line up. Cassie's eyes were not cold. Cold has weather in it. His eyes were a winter inside a library. Uzumaki Naruto, he said, tasting each syllable as if checking for counterfeits. Your ledger arrived at my office before you did. He looked mildly disappointed. Your writing is blunt. Your stamp is a murder weapon. Naruto said. Cassie inclined his head, polite. Correction instrument. Tamari laughed once, with her mouth closed. Of course it is. Cassie came on. He did not rush. The spear's tip wrote invisible strokes in the air as if practicing. Naruto met him without drama. Their first exchange was simple. Jab, angle, guard. The spear did not spark when it skimmed Naruto's muscle, it took. A sliver of the gauntlet blinked out. Not cut. Deleted. The hunger in Naruto roared, so quiet no one else could hear it, filling in the absence with furious speed. He tasted his own blood as it tried to decide which shape it was supposed to be. Don't harden, Hinata's voice called from the edge of his breath. Let it pass. He did the thing he had practiced in the wire cage. He became a different Naruto at the point of contact, not softer, not harder. Else, the spear nipped at what he had been, missed what he was now, took a shaving of air and not him. It wasn't perfect. It was enough to live. Cute, Cassie said. Admiration without warmth. Show me that again. Pay me, Naruto said, and kicked the spear shaft. He might as well have kicked a line from a sutra. The spear didn't care. It turned and wrote the syllable in the air. Mu. It didn't sound like anything. It sounded like finding out your favorite word has been pronounced wrong your whole life. The tone went through Naruto's diaphragm and made his stomach forget it had a job. Chakra stuttered in him like a candle flame hit by a sigh. He made a new organ with his will. Not big. A thin membrane from rib to rib, damp and eager. He caught the sound in it like a drummer catches a beat and reflected it back into itself. It tore him to do it. He coughed, shocked by the iron taste of the blood he wasn't supposed to still have. He laughed because it worked at all. That all you got? He said, lying. Cassie's brow lifted a human fraction. No, he said, like a teacher deciding to escalate. The spear wrote a faster line. Sakura dragged a Kumo Chunin out of its way without asking permission. Ino tugged the man's fear sideways like a horse's head to keep him from bolting off a cliff in his mind. Darui's BL. Aide kissed the spear's haft and learned regret. Samui's kick went under it, rude and good. Anchor. Tenten yelled, and threw a device that looked like a child's toy to most eyes and like salvation to the right ones. It clamped the spearhead to the stone for a heartbeat, screaming as the syllable tried to unmake the bolts. Karen. Karen was already there. She didn't bite this time. She slammed in. Ked knuckles into Naruto's collarbone and finished the stroke she'd been pretending she didn't still need to finish. The counter mantra lit like cool fire across his skin and climbed the nerves to his palm. He grabbed the shaft of the spear with his ring-bearing hand, expecting to lose fingers, and instead felt the sound scramble. Not stop. Stutter. Ha! He gasped. Rude bones work. Cassie let I.M. have the moment because he was watching too many moments at once. Hinata slid into that window. She didn't aim for Tenketsu. She aimed for breath. 2 fingers to a muscle under Cassie's ribs that most men don't know they own. His exhale stuttered, and the spear's syllable almost lost its place. Tamari closed her fan. The wind slumped. Snow dropped out of the air all at once like a sheet shaken. The sudden whiteout put weight on the spear that had nothing to do with gravity. For the first time, Cassie's stance looked like work. Naruto pressed. He didn't try to win. He tried to unfit the spear. Enough that it couldn't decide what was name and what was noise. He layered identities through his hands the way Ino had drilled him. I am the boy on the bridge. I am the breath Hinata counted. I am Tenten's copper. I am Karen's bad manners in a good cause. I am Ino's permission. I am Temari's wind when it is not yours to order. The syllable bit his palm and found too many doors to go through and lost interest for a blink. That's it. Ino breathed from where she stood with her fingers on the head of a terrified auditor, not quite inside, not quite out. Blur. Make him pick. Cassie's eyes changed, not in color. In attention. From curiosity to respect to decision. He cut the anchor's bolts with a line that didn't belong to steel. The spear came up like a truth that had remembered it was supposed to be inconvenient. Naruto. Sakura's cry cut across the pass as a prayer went up that had not been sanctioned. A bearded auditor had closed his eyes and begun to chant in a voice he had been saving for his own funeral. The prayer was sad and beautiful and intended to make the world choose a smaller door. Ino moved like she'd been expecting him. She didn't storm his mind. She sat down in the front room and offered him tea. Stop, she said without arrogance, without pity. Please. He did, because no one had called him by his first name that kindly since he was 10. He wept. The prayer forgot its place. The world chose not to take the smaller door. Cassie thrust. Naruto's new diaphragm caught the tone and almost tore. He screamed and used the scream. Sound reflects better off sound than off a shut mouth. His laugh broke into it. Laughter is an ugly mirror. The syllable slipped in the crack between grin and gasp and struck the stone behind him. A patch of mountain forgot how to be mountain and became air. Snow smelled astonished. Enough, Cassie said, and where another man would have raged at being thwarted, his mouth went to a line a mason might use when a wall refuses to true. He stepped back. He lowered the spear. Temari's fan halted mid-stroke. Tenten froze with a second anchor in her hand. Kakashi didn't uncurl from the coil he had made of himself. Naruto didn't move. He waited to see if the gift had a hook. You are not the problem, Cassie told Naruto, and for a heartbeat Naruto hated him more for the politeness than for the spear. I am not the solution. I am an index. He tapped the spear butt on the ground twice. The author will see you now. No, Temari said, too late and not wrong. The air folded like paper and tore along a crease that hadn't been there a moment before. A scroll unfurled from no hand and spilled a river of neat, dark strokes. They hung, then lifted, then made a man because the world didn't know what else to do with that much confidence. He was pale without being sick. He wore a robe that had chosen not to be silk and succeeded. His hair was the white of chalk that has been used. When he smiled, it was a courtesy that forgot to be kind and remembered to be accurate. Iryoku, he said, and the name made the snow under their feet arrange itself. Otsutsuki, third of his name, first of his task. They call me Taliman when they are trying to make me smaller. He did not look at Cassie. He did not look at the spear. He looked at Naruto like a man looks at an equation that claims to have 3 equal signs. Prototype, he said. Some. Ledger. Naruto didn't spit. He wanted to. Naruto, he said. Iryoku liked that. Good, he said. We begin at disagreement. The world changed its walking speed. Not slowed. Not exactly. Naru. To felt the space between his heartbeat and his next breath stretched thin enough to see light through. Iryoku stepped sideways and was where he should have been if Naruto had been foolish enough to blink. He pointed. The mountain ignored him. He said, "Rock," and the rock apologized for resisting and held still. Kakashi flickered, all business, took a cut at Iryoku's wrist that would have made another god drop a spear. There was no spear. There was a label. The blade passed through. Record, which was what Iryoku had called himself in that second, and you can't cut a noun with steel. Naruto moved in anyway, because nouns still have to share space with other nouns. He tried to take. He's good at taking. The hunger is an excellent librarian of stolen patterns. His palm met Iryoku's sleeve and found the interim between counting and counted and slid off like oil. Ah, Iryoku said, interested as a scholar, not insulted as a man. You do not like to be taken. He looked down at Naruto's hand where the copper ring pulsed. But you like to keep. Ino skimmed the edge of Iryoku's mind and made a sound like a person who has put their hand into a jar to grab the nice thing and discovered the yaw. R has a neck too narrow to let them pull their hand back out if they keep it. He's labeled himself, she said, shaken. He keeps changing the label. The mind doesn't grip if the jar says air 1 second and glass the next. Hinata's sight flared hot white. She went past Tenketsu, past vessels, past all the places where things are supposed to be. She watched the names move under Iryoku's skin like fish schooling. He's writing you as a noun on a scroll while he talks, she told Naruto, breath steady through fear. If he can name you precisely enough, he'll unwrite everything that isn't the name. Rude, Naruto said, because if he didn't he'd scream. Tenten's anchors didn't know what to bite. The cage sang and the tone came back embarrassed. Temari's wind caught a label called snow, and pushed it into a label called drift, and Iryoku led it because he did not care about the weather. Cassie watched it all like a man pleased to have summoned a consultant who would say what he has been saying, but with more this time. Don't fight him where he is, Ino said, fingers digging into her own arms like a person refusing to be carried away by a flood they've chosen to stand in. Make him fight you where you are not finished. Blur. Break the name. Namebreak. I hate that name, Naruto said, and loved it. He closed his eyes. In the dark, the hunger padded closer, smug. We could eat him, it purred, big and fox-like. It was not Kurama's voice. It was his own wanting, wearing Kurama's shadow because shadows like to try on larger shapes. Later, Naruto told it. Maybe never. He chose. Not oneself. A seam. He became the spot between being and being counted. He became the edge of his own page. Iryoku's finger wrote something that might have been monster, and might have been some. And the ink stubbed against the wrinkle Naruto had made of himself. Ugly, Iryoku said, impressed. You should see my handwriting, Naruto said. Hinata's breath touched the shape of his next exhale. He followed it. Ino brushed the echo storm and turned a scream into a low hum. Karen slammed the heel of her hand into the counter-stroke on his collarbone and sent a sting up his neck that made the syllables Iryoku had started to put there lose their place. Tenten flung an anchor at Iryoku's feet on principle. It landed on foot, and foot was, for a second, a thing with bolts. He stepped out of it with an annoyed glance. Temari laughed and nearly lost her head for it when Cassie moved to correct her fun. Darui's blade caught the spear and paid for it with a line of gone that made the metal grieve. Samui put a knee in an auditor's ribs and called it public service. Naruto did something he doesn't like to do. He ran away. Not from the fight, from the word that was trying to be put on him. He drew the space tight between seconds and wriggled through with as much grace as a man climbing through a window half his size. He grabbed Sakura on the way by her elbow and tugged her out from Und. A banner deciding that healer must mean still. He tucked Hinata into his shoulder with an apology and no explanation because the field had decided observer meant stationary. He yelled at Temari without words to move left. She didn't need the words. They own wind in Suna. She slid into a lane the prayer wasn't watching. Iryoku watched him do all that with the good humor of a man at a PLA. Why, who has figured out the twist before the actors get to it? You cannot win a definition fight, he said. Not if I am holding the pen. Cool, Naruto said. Then we won't fight definitions. He hit the ground with his palm and grew a shape that wasn't armor or blade or shield. A smear. An ugly, fuzzy-edged, gum-stuck to a boot mess that made the nice clean lines of the prayer snag. Namebreak wasn't elegant. It was, no, written in crayon across a law book. The banners flapped with disgust. Go, Kakashi said, and didn't mean it as permission. He meant it as all of you, now. They went up and out, sideways and down, through a crack the spear had made in the mountain face. Half of Kumo came with them because they were smart. Half stayed because someone had to pretend to hold the pass. Cassie did not follow. He had gotten what he wanted, confirmation. Iryoku let them slip not because he couldn't catch them, he could, but because sometimes a good story gets better if you wait 2 chapters for the last act. Snow closed behind them like a jaw. They lay under a lip of rock miles down the goat path and breathed like people who have learned to appreciate the sound. Sakura went down the line of them, inventorying bones and lies. Temari's fan had a notch bitten out of one rib. She stroked it like a scar she intended to keep. Tenten sat with her hands on her knees, fingers shaking in a RH. YTHM only engineers can hear when the build is over. Karen crouched behind Naruto and touched the lines she'd put into him earlier, checking the ink had stayed. Ino watched him with her head tilted and her jaw set, as if daring him to try to joke it away. Hinata's palms pressed together. She didn't pray. She pressed her palms together the way she had taught him to press his breath between them and make space. We didn't lose, Naruto said, just to make the first sentence not something that hurt. We also didn't win, Temari said, because she likes numbers that add up. We live, Kakashi said. We brought our people. We made him miss once. We'll tax him for that later. Naruto laughed, shallow, and felt the laugh catch on the place the syllable had bruised under his ribs. You okay? He asked Hinata. She nodded. You, ask me in a minute. Karen pinched his ear. He's fine, she told Hinata, unhelpful and true. He'll be finer when I bite him. You're not my dog, Naruto said mildly. Don't be dramatic, she said. And bit him anyway, quick and sharp. The bite made the world stop listening to the left. He didn't thank her because she didn't want thanks for this. She wanted him to ask next time before he started drifting. He nodded instead. She nodded back. Ino rolled her eyes so hard she should have injured something. Tenten passed Naruto a tin of sesame brittle, grimaced at her own product, and said, "Eat. You look like a law tried to sit on you." "It did," he said around sugar and grief. "It was rude." They came back to Konoha not as victors, not as guests. As people who edit a room and a roof and something old that remembered their names before specialists tried to shorten them. The old shrine by the river had burned years ago. Its stones remembered. The air over it smelled like ash that had decided not to go anywhere else. "Here," Naruto said, when the group began to scatter to beds and baths and cooks who would complain at them with love. "Give me a minute." Kashi looked at him long enough to say don't die and then walked away with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders set in the shape of a man who would not let anyone take tolls on his children tonight. Hinata stayed. Of course she did. She didn't touch him. Of course she didn't. He knelt where a statue had been and wasn't and pressed his palms to the basalt the way you do when you suspect a door and don't know the knock. He didn't have a key. He had a tenant. "Hey," Naruto said into the dark where names go when they don't stick anymore. "You awake?" Silence is a sound when you're waiting for it. It breathed. Then the laugh came. Deep and sharp and delighted in a way that would have terrified him when he was younger and made him grin now. It slouched out of the cracks between stones and out of his own bones and hung on the air between them like a scarf. "About time," the fox said, lazy as the sun on tile. "You've been interesting. It is rude to be interesting and not come say hello." Naruto didn't bow. He wasn't sure which of them that would be for. "Kurama," he said, and it fit in his mouth like a piece of fruit you hadn't known you'd been craving. "Naruto," Kurama answered, in the two nay of a man trying out a nickname he might yet make into an insult or a tenderness. "You picked a fight with a librarian." "Accountant," Naruto corrected. "And his boss, who thinks labels are a weapon." "Labels are a net," Kurama said. "If you are a fish." The warmth moved, thudded, was a heartbeat the size of a house settling in the foundations of his chest. "You are other. Thanks. Don't blush. It's unflattering." Kurama sniffed a memory like a fox sniffing the air for storms. "You learn to blur. Good. I eat names sometimes when I am bored." They whine. "I prefer vows." They crunch. Naruto startled, then grinned because it was either grin or decide he had made a mistake and that wasn't happening. "We could eat a god," he said, trying on the sentence like armor. Kurama's laughter rolled like thunder that had been fed whiskey. "We could. You would not like the aftertaste. Too much paper." Naruto pictured the spear riding Mew and the piece of mountain giving up. He pictured Iryoku's clean hands ND the way he'd said prototype like it was a mercy to be that small. He pictured Tenten's wire, Hinata's breath, Ino's exacting pleas, Karen's teeth, Temari's fan, Sakura's steadying hand. He put the pictures in a row and made a path. "Or we could starve him," he said. Kurama's head cocked. If a head can cock when it is a voice and a warmth and a memory of teeth. "Make him hungry for a thing he cannot keep. Make him name himself until there's nothing left to count," Naruto said. "Or make a world so full of messy choices his lists break trying to hold them." Kurama purred. "You are a greedy boy." "Yeah," Naruto said, "but I know what I want." "Say it." "Not to be right," Naruto said. "To be true." The fox lay down inside him like a cat choosing a lap. "All right, little liar. Here is my breath. Here is my bite. When he says mew, you say no with the whole of me." "That'll do," Naruto whispered, and if his eyes stung it was the smoke from a fire that had gone out years ago and decided to come back for a night. Hinata stood just outside the ruin's edge. She didn't intrude. She didn't look away. When he stood, she nodded like a woman who had seen a man say the right thing to the right god and live. "Well," she asked. "He's funny," Naruto said. "I know," Hinata said, and relief blew the candle out of her shoulders. "You breathe different." "I'm going to," he said. He offered her his hand. He meant it as a thank you for the shape of breath she had taught him. She took it like a promise to keep practicing when practice got ugly. They stepped out of the shrine together. The river made city noise. A bead of lacquer tried to skitter under a broken tile and found itself turned turtle by the edge of Naruto's sandal. He did not crush it. He plucked it up and put it on the shrine's cold lip. Like an offering to a god of witnesses who was learning to be kinder. Sanzo Kuruma stood under a camphor tree down the path, hands folded, bells quiet. He looked at Naruto like a priest looks at a street orm he didn't schedule but had brought an umbrella for. You bleed, he observed. I'm not a ledger, Naruto said. Sanzo's mouth tilted a fraction. No, you were the correction. He inclined his head, not deep. Honest. Write a better sutra than we did. We're working on it, Naruto said. Sanzo's bells didn't ring when he left. That was a kindness. Naruto watched him go and chose to believe it was a choice. The village breathed. The past would hold or it wouldn't. Iryoku would write or he would read or he would learn a new verb. Cassie would file everything in its right drawer and then open the wrong one and be startled. Naruto tucked the blank scroll Tsunade had given him into his vest over his heart. He didn't write on it yet. He wasn't done living the next sentence. He had training to be eak and break again until the syllable broke on him instead. He had a fox to feed jokes to. He had a team to make laugh at the worst moments and breathe at the hardest and trust with what the hunger wanted. He had a librarian to make hungry and a spear to disrespect and a name to blur. He had breath, and it had teeth. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Archive of Stars, Heart of Leaves. The sky opened like a seam and bled numbers. Not blood, numbers, neat and dark, pouring out of a wound the size of a god's fingerprint. They drifted down in a lazy spiral over fire country, turned once over rice fields and river bends. And then found each other like iron filings, knitting themselves into a black spire that reflected no light and all of it at once. You couldn't measure how tall it was without losing count. If you looked too long you forgot a name. Your first dog, the good baker's daughter, the word for steam. On the market street, a potter held his hands over a wheel that had decided to be still someone appealed to its sense of order. What's the word for bread? He asked his wife, puzzled. The wife, who had known 40 words for bread as a girl because her grandmother had brought them from a coastal village, lost 3 and clung to one as if it were a child. Up on the Hokage monument, Naruto squinted, because that's what you do when something ridiculous parks itself in your sky. Iryoku's here, he said. Like naming a storm that had already soaked you. Hinata stood beside him, eyes pale and clear, seeing more veins in the world than the world wanted seen. It's not a tower, she said softly. It's a scroll pretending to have corners. Kakashi leaned on the carved stone of the fort's hair like a man determined to pretend his knees didn't ache. Lucky us, he murmured. He brought office supplies. Tamari didn't look at the spire. She watched the wind, the way a girl raised among dunes learns to read invisible things. The breeze off the north ridge had picked up a new habit. A whisper that sounded like a clerk counting years. He's labeling the sky, she said. Rude. A silver jingle without movement. Sanzo Kuruma at the far edge of the monument, bells muted. He bowed, not to religion or to office, but to the fact that there were people here worth bowing to. We tried to send letters, he said, and even his apology sounded precise. The ink never arrived. He has editorial control. Then we bring scissors, Tenten said, dropping a canvas roll that thunked like a small arsenal. She flipped it open. Coils of copper, chalk stubs bound in paper talismans, puck-sized anchors with ugly teeth. A little clay jar labeled in her neat block hand. No. Ino tapped the jar, amused. Minimalist. Effective, Tenten said. It's powdered bone ash and ground seal char and a very rude idea. Sprinkle it where the spire tries to tell you what you are, and for a heartbeat you're only what you decide. Karen lifted the jar, sniffed it, grimaced. Smells like stubborn, she say. Tee it down and pulled a brush out of her sleeve. I'll tune you as we go, she told Naruto without looking up. Do not wait to ask. Stop pretending you're a romantic hero about this, it's embarrassing. I'm not pretending, Naruto said. I'm the least romantic person you've ever met. Hinata coughed lightly into her fist in a way that said facts dispute that without embarrassing anyone. You brought allies, Kakashi asked Sanzo. Because polite men don't ask if the house is on fire, they ask how many buckets are clean. They brought themselves, Sanzo said, and for the first time since Naruto had met him there was real warmth in his voice. Down in the wide road below, bells and banners appeared and did not match. Some from the Commission of Pure Land hung in strips without prayers on them, blank, like a promise not yet made. Some wore old texts and new annotations in different inks. That's how you know a doctrine is trying to grow up. A handful of auditors knelt to the street and held children's hands while mothers ran with baskets of dried fish pressed to their chests. Others took down their chains before anyone asked them to. Cassie Riku came last, because of course he did. Clean robes. Zero mantra spear sheathed in a sleeve of silk that refused to admit it was afraid. He looked up at the spire like a mathematician looks at a proof he'd dreamed about and finally met. When he spoke, his voice carried to the monument without raising itself. For the safety of the world, he said. Try a different sentence, Naruto called back, and it was not mockery. It was a request to stop lying to both of them. Cassie's mouth tightened a millimeter. He lifted the spear and the silk fell away. The air around the blade thinned as if words had already begun to leave it. Sanzo shifted just enough to be counted as standing between. The bells at his wrist trembled but did not ring. Let us not write this on the street, Sanzo said evenly. There's a field for this argument. He has dragged it over us. Dragged, Tamari repeated, and smiled her desert smile. Then we drag back. They didn't draw plans. They packed them. The plan lived in the way Tenten tied 3 anchors into a triangle. And slung them like a necklace around Naruto's shoulders. It lived in Hinata's 2-finger tap on his sternum and the breath that followed like rain, and the way Ino took his hand with 2 daylight soft words, may I? Before pushing a thread through the mind link that tasted like cold water and consent. It lived in Karen's brush scratches along his collarbone, 3 strokes you could mistake for laziness until ink bit bone. In the way Tamari set her fan across her shoulder like a roof beam and looked at the wind until it stopped pretending to be neutral. Say it, Kurama rumbled inside Naruto, not unkind. Naruto closed his eyes for a heartbeat and felt the spire-right prototype on his skin, a draft, a pencil line he could smudge if he moved. He breathed Hinata's breath. He let Ino's thread hum without tugging. He waited until the hunger in him had padded 3 respectful circles and lay down like a massive, inconvenient, beloved dog. Not to be right, he told the fox, and the spire, and the village, and himself. To be true. Ah, Kurama said, pleased. Then eat only what lies. Deal. The archive spire's skin was not stone. It was decisions stacked until weight turned them honest. Where it cut through cloud. Letters scrolled. Names, dates, tax ledgers, a promise someone had made in a tea shop in Iron Country 32 years ago and kept, an apology written on a bamboo slip and never delivered. A child's list of beetles. You could feel yourself get smaller if you let your eyes unfocus. They didn't walk into a door. They walked into a footnote. A strip of blank margin peeled back like a ribbon. And behind it a narrow stair made of the same nothing you find in libraries when you accidentally get locked in after close. As they climbed, every step tried to label them. Woman, weapon, fox, sum, witness. The chalk in Tenten's fist left mean, necessary marks where the words wanted to sink, and the marks smoked like an insult that landed. 2 auditors waited on the landing, flanked by banners that hung without moving. Their faces were uncovered. Their robes were very clean. Containment, one began gently, and Ino raised a hand to stop him as if he were a friend approaching a cliff in the dark. Look at me, she said, and he did because no one had asked him that way all day. Do you want to do this? He hesitated. Not long. Long enough. Sanzo stepped from behind ND laid his 3 bells on the man's arm like a benediction. Witness, he said. The auditor's shoulders dropped. He nodded once to Ino like thanks for the embarrassing gift of being seen. He stepped aside. Cassie Riku was waiting past the landing because the world likes symmetry. The man who had unmade 20 in a barracks and the boy who refused to be counted stood in a corridor where distance couldn't decide its units. Cassie's spear rode a subtle curve in the air. Naruto's copper ring warmed against the pulse in his palm. You were brave, Cassie said without malice. And that is not the same as being correct. Good thing I didn't come for correct, Naruto said, easy. The spear flicked. If you blinked, you may have missed it. The syllable mu didn't make a sound. It made the absence of one. Naruto met it with the ugly diaphragm he'd grown between his ribs and the brighter breath Kurama had lent him. The syllable hit and the diaphragm flexed, and this time Naruto didn't just reflect it. He caught it like a ball, a hot coal. A joke, and he breathed it back out as something messier and human with jagged edges. Number. The corridor shivered. Letters trembled along one wall and misaligned, stuttering with the force of a word they hadn't been asked to accommodate before. Cassie absorbed it without a flinch. His eyes did something small that even Hinata would have missed if she hadn't been in love with paying attention. They warmed by half a degree. You've learned, he said. I get good teachers, Naruto said, and didn't pretend he didn't mean the man in front of him too. Enough, Sanzo called, Bells finally voicing his breath. Riku. Cassie's jaw worked. His hands did not lower. I am doing my job. Your job is to keep the world, Sanzo said. Not your ledger. The spear tilted. Outside, the spire made a sound like a page being turned by a polite giant. Inside, Tenten slid 3 anchors across the floor at Cassie's feet and snapped them shut. He could have removed them. He didn't. Karen pressed a thumb into the seal beneath Naruto's collarbone. Ino's thread in Naruto's mind tightened. Not possessive, partnered. Cassie, Naruto said, because saying a man's name in a hall where names were weapons was a decision. If you hold the door, he will close it on you too. Cassie breathed. The spear dipped. His hand opened like a man releasing an idea he had spent too many mornings keeping. The spear fell into his other palm and stayed a spear because ideas don't change their shape for you, you need help for that. Tenten's chalk skidded. Samui, she murmured, and the Kumo-ku. Noichi stepped through the margin of a page that was not there, resting her knuckles lightly on the spear shaft. Paper, Samui said softly, almost amused. It's just paper. And for one low, loving second, it was. The spear became a pole. Cassie blinked at his hands. Offended, relieved, offended at being relieved. He let go. The pole clattered. The spire caught its breath, offended too. Witness, Sanzo said once more. Bells ringing in earnest now, mourning and permission in the same tone. Cassie closed his eyes, opened them, and stepped aside. He didn't kneel. No one asked him to. That seemed important. At the spire's heart the world had been flayed to diagram. Pillars ringed a round room. Each pillar bore a label in careful hand. Jinchuriki, Demon Boy, Sum, Class C, Orphan, Consumer, Weapon, Hokage Wannabe. He hated that one in the normal human way of hating things that are too accurate to be dismissed. He loved Witness when he saw it, not because it flattered him, but because it put him next to people he wanted to stand with. In the ceiling above, the seam in the sky still bled numbers, but slower now, like a jug emptying itself. The floor was something softer than stone and harder than paper. It would be in his dreams afterwards, the way it yielded and resisted both at once. Iryoku Otsutsuki waited between 2 pillars like a man waiting for a thought to arrive. He had rolled his sleeves with neatness. His hair didn't move because it had chosen not to. He smiled at Naruto the way scholars smile at each other at a conference before they sharpen their knives with questions. Prototype, he said. He did not look at the others. That was the first mistake. I offered to write you correctly. You declined. It is rude to make me be imprecise. Naruto paced 2 steps to his right, put his hand on a pillar labeled monster, and leaned. I'm impolite, he agreed. Ask anyone. You are not many things, Iryoku said, indulgent. You are several dressed cleverly. Cute, Naruto said, and felt Kurama laugh in his ribs, low as summer thunder. Tenten scattered her rude chalk in the seams of the floor. Hinata drew breath next to Naruto and the breath drew him back into a shape that didn't wobble no matter how the room wanted him to. Ino's hand found Sakura's hand without their eyes leaving the work. The link between them spread like a web with consent written in every knot. Karen stood behind Naruto and wrote 2 tiny strokes at the nape of his neck, where he kept a knot of anger tied into muscle. The knot loosened. He didn't thank her out loud. The team has rules about when to talk. Tamari stepped to the farthest edge of the circle and opened her fan to 3 ribs. Wind hates being counted, she told the air. Cheat for me. The air cheated, and the spire's labels streamed sideways for a blink, revealing the messy handwriting underneath. It was beautiful. Iryoku watched all of them in that long blink and then chose not to see them again. There is a debt, he announced, addressing the room per se. This world has made too many names and not paid for them. I collect the tax. Cool, Naruto said. We're here to burn your ledger. You can't burn a record by disagreeing with it, Iryoku said. And for the first time his mouth twisted, annoyed at being forced into a conversation he'd rather present as a paper. What if we don't disagree? Ino asked sweetly. What if we edit? Iryoku's gaze brushed her and slid off, uninterested. A mistake that would cost him. He raised a hand. The pillars lit with thin, even script not written with ink. His voice moved the words. You are Jinchuriki, he said, and the floor inched toward Naruto's feet like a charity box being pushed at a guest. You are Prototype, and the air around Naruto's shoulders tightened like a collar being corrected. You are Consumer, and a spot behind Naruto's eyes itched like old shame rising, eager to be useful. Naruto reached out and touched Consumer with 2 fingers. The label buzzed like a fly under a cup. He could have smashed it. He didn't. He slid it half an inch to the left, crooked. I've been, he said. I'm not. Iryoku's eyes sharpened. Cute, he said back. Stop flirting, Tamari murmured. He wrote a new name into the air with a tilt of his wrist. It was too big to be a name and too tidy to be a truth. The room wanted to accept it. The hunger in Naruto wanted to lunge and swallow it. Huge and sweet, like eating a word would make it his. He breathed instead. Hinata's fingers hovered, not touching him. He matched the space between her hand and his skin. And that was enough to make the wanting blink. Let me try, Ino said softly, and Naruto felt her at the edge of his thoughts the way you feel medicine steam when you hold your head over a bowl. May I, please, he said, because it's a good word to say to a friend who's about to pull something out of you that you might secretly want to keep. She didn't reach for his self. She reached for the L. Abel's trying to cheat their way inside and blurred them, as if rubbing them with her sleeve, until they smudged and spread and lost their sharp edges. You are not finished enough to sum, she told Iryoku without looking at him. Karen's finger flicked, and the seal along Naruto's collarbone cooled. The buzz of mu that lived in the room like cheap wine lost its bite. Tenten's chalk and Temari's win. D and Ino's blur and Hinata's breath and Sakura's steady presence each took a corner of the problem and refused to let it be tidy. Iryoku finally looked at them and did not like what he saw, a problem that didn't want to be a single noun. He pointed. The ceiling seam, so far above, brightened. Stars spilled. No, words that looked like stars. Names of rivers, names of gods, names of children not yet born written as probabilities. He began to count, out loud, quiet as falling snow. Counting is an attack if you do it with confidence. The spire's heart tightened. One by one the labels on the pillars pulled taut. Stop, Sanzo said. Not to Iryoku. To himself. He stepped into the ring with his bells on his wrist and an old, tired hope fresh in his mouth. Otsutsuki, he said, unflinching. You are making the same mistake we made. We believed erasure was mercy. You mislabeled mercy as power, Iryoku said, bored. You will make a better approved term when you have watched me. I'm done watching. Sanzo took off his bells, set them on the floor, and stood there as if he'd stripped to skin. He looked a little smaller and a lot lighter. Cassie Riku stepped into the edge of the circle, hands empty. And that was the heaviest thing he had done in a decade. He looked at the pillar that read index, his pillar. Iryoku had been generous, and took a breath. I was wrong, he said to no one on purpose. I like being correct. I was wrong. I will pay for it. Iryoku's mouth pursed, not used to this flavor. We don't do confessions at this stage, he said, as if chiding a student for jumping ahead in the lesson. Naruto grinned. I do. He didn't sprout claws. He didn't roar. He didn't play it small either. He stood up all the way in himself and let the lattice he had been holding as a practical thing unfold. Blacklight, what a miserable word for a living hunger that had learned restraint, bloomed under his skin like scaffolding made by a patient spider. Kurama's chakra poured through it, not as flame to be feared, but as heat that chooses when to burn and when to warm. The lattice caught foxfire and translated it into a shape the world could stand. Tails unfurled, not fur, vectors of light traced in the air. 9 lines of intent that moved as if someone had breathed on wind. He was not a fox. He was not a boy. He was the decision to carry both without apology. Evolved chakra prototype mode, Tenten said under her breath. Delighted. We need a better name. Later, Tamari said, eyes bright. Let him embarrass a god first. Iryoku's face changed, finally. Interest widened. Something like relief flashed and vanished. Here is a problem worth solving. He said a word, not Mew. Older. A private name that systems use for themselves when they're alone in the server room. The pillars surged. Jinchuriki tried to staple Naruto to the floor. Some tried to drape him like a bad cloak. Monster tried to make his hands claws he hadn't chosen. Naruto put a palm to Hokage wannabe and laughed. That one can stay, he said. And the room faltered because it had not prepared for someone who curated his own insults. He chose. He did not choose alone. Keep witness, Ino said, steady as a metronome. Keep friend, Sakura said. From the edge, of course there was a pillar for that. He hadn't noticed it because it had not been pushed at him as a weapon. Keep loud, Tamari said. It's inefficient and useful. Keep stubborn, Tenten said. I engraved a lot of that into your bones. Hinata didn't speak. She touched the label true with 2 fingers. It glowed. That's all. He swallowed. That was enough. Return the rest. Naruto told the room, and meant it. Not burned. Not smashed. Return to wherever the world keeps words when they are not being used as blades. Iryoku frowned. His hand flicked in reality and the spire turned to ledger lines and margins and rules about margins. He reached to write record on his own sleeve and Naruto moved like a man grabbing a cup before it falls off a table. Now, he said, and Ino was already there. She didn't dive into Iryoku's mind. That would have been arrogant and a good way to get stuck in a jar labeled fool. She went to the label instead. Record. She reached through the idea as if it were gauze and tugged. No, she told the word, passionate and calm all at once. Not yet. Live. For one naked second Iryoku was not a record. He was a person holding his breath in a room where breath had not been on the syllabus. Naruto hit him. It was a Rasengan, if you're a historian, and not, if you're a poet. It didn't spin just because spinning makes pressure. It spun because promises do. The lattice in his arm gave it a geometry that didn't chew, it held. The foxfire inside it didn't burn Iryoku, it warmed him like a hand on the back of a neck, saying you can let go. And threaded through it like a stitch in a seam, Hinata's breath kept time. It hit Iryoku in the chest like a simple thought, you don't have to be record. You can be wrong and live. You can be alive and leave some things uncounted. For a heartbeat you could see the boy he might have been if he'd met someone kind, someone infuriating, someone who liked to put their elbow. WS on tables and ruin neat notes with ramen broth. Then he exhaled. The archive listened to his exhale like a dog listens for its name and didn't hear it. The ceiling seam sagged. The words that had been leaking out like stars stopped organizing themselves and fell as tiny, black confetti. The pillars went blurry. The floor under their feet remembered it was only floor and yelped at the abuse. Iryoku stepped back, not angry, not stunned, thoughtful. That felt worse. You cannot sustain that indefinitely, he observed. Choice is exhausting. Naruto said, breathing hard, sweat on his lip. So is counting everything. Maybe try a nap. It will come back, Iryoku said, and it wasn't a threat. It was a truth about entropy and scriptures and habits. We will, too, Sanzo said quietly. Cassie picked up the spear that had been a pole a minute ago and looked at it like a man deciding whether to keep a ring he'd been married to too long. He set it down. He put his foot on the silk sleeve and dragged it like a scandal. We'll write a different job description, he said, and it stung him to say it, you could hear it. Tamari shut her fan. Outside, she said briskly. Before the roof. Remembers it's a footnote and closes to prove a point. They ran. Ino carried 3 mines for a stretch that had forgotten their legs and put them back in their bodies like a friend returning borrowed coats. Tenten left anchors at corners that wanted to square them into compliance. Karen tapped Naruto's neck hard enough to startle a curse out of him and laughed when the curse steadied his breath. Hinata's fingers brushed Naruto's sleeve once when a label tried to stick again. He didn't look, he didn't have to. They came out of the spire like friends late to a meal. The sky had a tear in it. Chi was healing by deciding it had never been ripped. The spire didn't collapse. It demoted itself to a smudge of shadow against clouds and, a minute later, to nothing anyone could point at. Konoha's ROs shone the cheap gray they always shine at noon after rain. Smoke came up from cook fires and repair pits. Somewhere a vendor found the word bread again and said it 3 times in joy, just because he could. The bells at Sanzo's wrist rang for the first time that day in gratitude. He took them off a final time and pressed them into Cassie's palm, eyebrow lifted. Cassie held them, looked like a man, tasting humility like an unfamiliar fruit, and nodded once. The commission of pure land. The parts that didn't run, the parts that ran after for different reasons, gathered in a semicircle without anyone telling them to. Sanzo looked at Naruto. You don't want an altar, he said. I like lunch, Naruto agreed. Not altars. Sanzo smiled, and that smile felt like page turning. Then no altars. A charter. He lifted his chin. Commission of witness, he said, careful with each syllable. Our job is to watch, to write when writing helps, to shut up when it doesn't, and to keep chains for doors and not for throats. Cassie drew breath like it hurt and like he preferred it that way. And to apologize in ink, he added. Loudly, Tamari suggested. Publicly, Ino amended. Legibly, Tenten insisted. Hinata glanced at Naruto and didn't have to say anything. You could feel the yes in the quiet between them. Danzo's files did not burn easy. That felt right. They were stored in a place so sensitive. It had become invisible. A room with low ceilings and good ventilation, shelves built by a man who liked wood and despised people, the kind of lock that prides itself on never having had to crow about being locked. Naruto opened it with a key he hated having taken and didn't apologize for using. He had not come alone. Sanzo came with an armful of blank paper and a good pen. Kakashi came with a bundle of old O's and a pair of tongs. Ino sat in the doorway to keep memories from running down the hall and getting lost like loose cats. Karen stood with a hand on Naruto's shoulder, pulse under her knuckles watching for the drift. Hinata set a bowl of water on the floor because the world goes better when bowls of water are present. Tenten had fashioned a little iron brazier that breathed fun. Wyan would eat paper without coughing ash into the village. Sakura brought bandages because the past cuts when you pull it out of corners. Naruto didn't read. He didn't need to. The files knew their own shame. He put a palm to each folder's spine and asked it if it wanted to go now. Some did, jerking in his hand as if they'd been listening at the door for years. Some tried to sell him one more excuse. He looked at Sanzo for those. Sanzo read, face a field in winter, honest, unadorned, hard. He nodded when a confession belonged to fire, not trial. They fed the brazier until its breath was steady. Even fire can be greedy. You have to set a rhythm. The room learned it. Ino learned the way each burning sounded and caught a few echoes before they leapt at Naruto like pups who had never learned not to knock people down. Later, she told them gently, setting each in a neat corner of his mind with a blanket on it. Ask. He'll answer if you ask. Some of the things Naruto had taken earlier, on the bridge, in a hall, under a prayer, rose out of him with the smoke, not because he wanted to be rid of them but because they wanted to be gone and he had stopped wanting to keep what wasn't his. They drifted up, yes, like that. A little, like souls if you like that word or like regret if you don't, and the vent took them and the sky made itself big enough to hold them without becoming a church. Kakashi held a paper with Danzo's hand on it and squinted as if trying to read the man's bones through his script. You don't get to be tidy now, he told the page, mild as rain. He fed it to fire. When they were done, the room felt like a mouth that had had a rotten tooth pulled. Sore, relieved, empty in the way that makes space for apples. Teeth, Sakura said into the quiet, and they all law. Because that was exactly the right thing to say. Celebrations in Konoha are never official at the start. They accrete like honey on corners. Someone brings dumplings. Someone else brings noodles. A child runs with an enormous barley bun, is overtaken by a second child who takes it with the solemn obligation of best friend and trips into a woman with soot on her cheek who laughs and breaks the bun in two. You can call it a festival when a band shows up. No band showed up. The drums heard themselves and came anyway. Naruto ate an impossible number of things on sticks and watched the village decide to be itself again. He did not make a speech. He did not get put on anyone's shoulders. He drifted in the warm human currents and learned the names of 2 stray cats and forgot the word for ledger for 10 entire minutes on purpose. Then the people he had dragged into this particular mess found him, one by one, pulled by a magnet that doesn't show up on compasses. Tenten threw a canvas roll at his chest. He fumbled it, almost dropped it, caught it like a man who'd learned he could catch delicate things without breaking them. Maintenance kit, she said. You're going to start taking care of the stupid armor you keep growing, or I'm going to file a complaint with your bones. He unrolled tiny files, slivers of chalk, a copper brush, a leather strap backed with seal paper. You made me a grooming kit, he said, delighted. For the animal you put on, she said, and punched his shoulder lightly. Don't wait for me to fix you. Karen walked past him, not looking at him on purpose, and pressed a strip of paper to his ribs. The ink bright and neat, tape rough against skin. Try not to explode, she muttered, which is how she says you did good. He grinned. She didn't not smile. Then, she smacked the back of his head lightly because he'd have gotten insufferable if she hadn't. Tamari made a face at a tray of sesame cakes and, when he wasn't looking, stole the last dumpling from his plate. He looked down at the empty spot, then at her with theatrical horror. She shrugged without remorse. Earn the next one, she said, and went to untangle a small political knot at the edge of E square that had become a domestic knot and therefore more dangerous. Ino dropped beside him on a low wall and sat with her ankles crossed, the posture of a girl at a bus stop pretending not to be the sharpest knife in 10 kilometers. Tell me which memories you're keeping tonight, she said softly. He answered without showing off. The boy with the charcoal on his fingers, he said. The way the pump squealed when it remembered to be a pump. Sanzo setting his bells down like confessing. Cassie looking offended at his own relief. Hinata's fingers touching true. Tenten's chalk with rude edges. Karen's bite, the good kind. Sakura saying you're, please. Kurama's laugh. Good list, she said. Make room for new ones. Tomorrow, he said. Tonight, she corrected. Eat another dumpling. He looked down at the empty plate. Looked up at Tamari, sighed like a martyr, and stood. He didn't find Hinata. She found him. She didn't speak. She took his hands and put them together, then split them. And he breathed the shape she'd taught him, and the world slowed to the speed of being kind to a single human for a minute. The crowd moved around them like water deciding not to drown rocks today. You're breathing different, she said, and smiled not because of him but with him. Kurama's funny, he said, and meant 2 other things with those words. She heard all 3. She squeezed his fingers once and did not let go until he chose to. Sanzo came then with Cassie, and the little knot their walking made open for them, not as for men to be admired but as for men bringing a bowl to a table. Sanzo had a paper in his hand, already smudged with the noise of use. Charter, he said, almost shy. We wrote it standing up. Tamari plucked it and scanned. Tenten peered over her shoulder. Ino eached over Tenten's other shoulder and tapped a clause about chains and doors. Hinata nodded at a line about names spoken with consent, and Karen took the pen out of Sanzo's hand and scratched a word. Into the margin. Apologize, not performative. Then she handed the pen to Naruto. He didn't want it. That felt like a good reason to take it. He signed. Not large, not small. He didn't add a title. A.B. Oi slid under his elbow to see better and bumped him, and the line of the second U wobbled, and he left it that way because it looked like laughter. Later, much later, the square thinned. The drums went home. The fires went to ash. The sky balanced itself back to black. He climbed because he always had. The monument took him like it always did. He sat under the stone faces, back to the fort's chin, and watched Konoha glow. Footsteps reached him at the pace of a man who refuses to sneak. Kakashi, carrying 2 bowls of convenience store curry and looking smug about it. He set one beside Naruto and didn't say proud. Teachers don't. They make sure you eat and then tell you a joke they pretend is for them. This better not be romance, Kakashi said, waving a spoon at the night. I will gag. It isn't, Naruto said. It's just human. Worse, Kakashi said mildly, and dug in. Naruto ate. He breathed. He listened to the village and the fox and the quiet, and none of them tried to be louder than the others. He took the blank scroll Tsunade had given him from inside his vest, the one she'd said meant trust, and unrolled it on his knees. He did not write a speech. He wrote 3 names in a column down the left-hand side. Not for order, For wait. Kasi Riku, Sanzo Kuruma, Iryoku Otsutsuki. He drew no lines between them. Not yet. He put the pen away and sat with what he could stand. The last of the lacquer spies, the kind that pretend to be beads, clicked its legs at the edge of the monument and tried to decide if it still had a job. Naruto reached down, plucked it up, and set it on the stone in front of him like a pilgrim setting down a burden at a shrine. Witness, he told it. Not erasure. It froze, tiny and ridiculous and, somehow, a little holy. The wind off the trees smelled like leaf and smoke and warm iron. Hinata's laughter rose from a street below, not for him, with him. Temari's voice argued happily with a vendor about the economics of sesame cake. Tenten cursed a small, beautiful curse about a spring she'd lost in the dark and then found it and whooped under her breath. Ino told a joke only Sakura would admit to finding funny. Karen scolded a genin for El King like his knees were borrowed and then taught him how to stand. Naruto's shadow lay long across the stone, bigger than a boy's, smaller than a god's. Perfect. Chapter 5 End.